Good, thank you. Welcome back. We'll reconvene our hearing. Following the hearing submissions the last 2 days, we're now into the deliberations for the next hour or two. I don't have anything specific to say on this at this stage, other than to hand back to the council officers to explain anything that needs explaining, or follow up on the questions we've asked, or however you want to deal with it, really.
Yes, so thank you, Chair. We've prepared, if you're amenable to going through this presentation, which deals with some of the main issues that come through submission and some of your questions as well. What we'll do is we've also received all of your questions. Thank you for that, and prepared responses. So we'll sort of dip in and out of those questions as well to align with how we've set up the presentation here. And just before I carry on with that, just introduce Colin Shields, who's online with us from Tonkin & Taylor. Colin, do you just want to quickly outline your area of expertise, right, for the panel?
Yep, good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, I'm Colin Shields from Tonkin & Taylor. I'm a transport engineer with 35 years plus experience from UK, Middle East, and the last 8 years working in New Zealand. And I have done quite a lot of work with council on various projects, including this Freedom Camping Bylaw and also the Ladies Mile master planning and plan change work.
Thanks, Colin. And we'll also have Peter joining shortly, I understand. Peter Cochrane. He's also from TNT and has been involved in the project. In addition, just introduce our enforcement colleagues who are here too, who help answer some questions potentially.
Yeah, Carrie, so the manager of parking. Katie, parking coordinator.
Cool. And do you know the rest of the team?
Yeah, okay.
Oh, yeah. Cool. So, okay. It's okay. I'll just go through. Excellent. So, just a quick recap to begin with, because obviously we're working with a quite constrained regulatory, legislative environment, a piece of legislation, the Freedom Camping Act, which sets a really clear scope for what we can and can't consider when developing the Freedom Camping Bylaw. So just to recap on that, House Section 11 only allows us to declare areas as restricted and prohibited for freedom camping in order to protect one of those three areas, being the area, health and safety of people who visit this area and access to the area. What does area mean? So that's land controlled and managed by QLDC as the local authority, or in our case as well, it also includes specific areas of NZTA land with the agreement of Chief Executive of NZTA. And the Act also prevents us from applying blanket prohibitions. You'll also likely recall the judicial review that Council went through recently with respect to its previous Freedom Camping Bylaw. The court found that previously we considered irrelevant matters that resulted in the portion of the bylaw. Those were property values factor, so protection of economic values, including private and residential commercial areas, but also amenity values factor. So yeah, really important learning. We make sure that we have included those in the process this time round, and it's important that we keep them in mind as we work through the deliberations as well. So yeah, there was a lot of concern raised by submitters in regard to enforcement. The hearing report addresses this in some detail in paragraph 30I, but in addition to that, just wanted to highlight another sort of wider point that's quite important with respect to different options in terms of how we manage freedom camping, potentially through the bylaw or not. So the Act's default position is that freedom camping can occur in an essentially uncontrolled manner across all of QLDC's land, with the exception of reserves. So in that context, we would retain a challenging enforcement obligation because there are still requirements for freedom camps to be certified self-contained. So what the draft bylaw does is it attempts to provide a structured regulatory framework in order to provide benefits for us and for campers in terms of what they know they need to comply with and what we know we need to enforce. So the important point, I guess, that we're trying to make is that enforcement challenges will remain under any regulatory framework that we set out in the bylaw, or if we choose not to have a bylaw, regulatory challenges remain. And that last point there is important as well, is that while we have to be cognizant of the enforcement challenges that might be present, it's not actually within the scope of section 11 when we're making a freedom camping bylaw. So caution needs to be applied to how that challenge influences the formulation of a bylaw.
Yeah, so aware that a lot of questions and comments came up around enforcement, and consequently the panel had a lot of questions. So providing you with some answers to those. There was a question around enforcement costs being, cost neutral, how much it is. So information I can, as a starter, but you can follow up with the rest of the team, is that the cost of the service is roughly 160 to 190K per year, and the total quantum of infringements was 500. The number that the team used for the recovery basis across the board is 65%. So that means that approximately $320,000 recovered from that 500. Anything else to add on that front? Does that cover that?
That's correct.
Okay. Other enforcement questions?
Can I just ask a question on?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So yeah, so that sort of flipped it from what I guess someone had presented. Yeah, so it's more than paying for enforcement. And that 65%, that's allowing for fines that people don't pay, that skip the country or whatever, and we never get. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Can everyone just speak up just a little bit? I might be going deaf from my old age, but I am struggling to hear everybody.
Okay.
No, thanks, Jane. Yes, it is sometimes hard, especially people online too.
Also, that's maybe not easier as well.
Yeah.
Another enforcement question was around fraudulent self-containment stickers, and the response to that is that the warrants on the vehicle dash is what is looked at, not those stickers, and that there is an infringement for fraudulent warrants, which officers can raise quite easily if it is found to be fraudulent. Anything else on that, Rick, team?
There is a database as well for the new stickers. So our officers in the field they are unsure of the green ones. There is an online database that is capturing those. So whilst we're still in a phasing period, we might not hold all of them, but eventually it'll have all of the stickers online that they can check in the field if they're unsure.
So they'll actually be able to check
Against a database, yes, that for those green ones.
But then that's only under the current or old self-containment rules, and that the new rules have been delayed by a year until July this year.
No, we've got part of the new rules is in now.
Oh, right.
So there's a number of vehicles that are in the old system still. There's no database for those, but the new rules there is a database for,
okay.
And eventually everyone will be on that database.
Yeah, by June or July next year.
Next year, yeah.
Is there any kind of moratorium at a nationwide level about the sort of vans that are more challenging to be self-contained entering the higher fleet? Like, will this become a changing demographic where we're not actually dealing with vans that are hard to be self-contained?
The rental vehicles should already have the green warrants. If they don't, they're not allowed to freedom camp anymore. So that happened in December at the end of last year. I think something worth noting is that some complaints this year have raised concerns around the standard of vehicle that are displaying the green warrants. So the fraudulent warrant, it only deals with tampering of warrants. If you suspect that a car has a valid green warrant, but it doesn't look like it should, perhaps, like I saw a Toyota Corolla recently with one, that's actually a separate regulating body who give the certifying authorities the power to do that. So that's a sort of separate a work stream, if you like, that, yeah.
So is that been tidied up? Is that something that's been looked at on a nationwide level?
Well, from a legal perspective, those cars, those smaller cars that have been given a legal green warrant, and that would be for the plumbers, gas fitters, train people to investigate the PGDB. Yeah, sorry, can never remember the full.
So related to this, not leaving it entirely, there was a question from submitters around the use of green warrant certification. Officers consider that it's appropriate to rely on the default position in the Freedom Camping Act. In this regard, PGDB by the regulators. Anything else to add to that point?
No, I don't think so. No, I think this sort of national standard is now moving towards that green warrant, and there was an extension granted to the end of June next year. So we're just still in this transition phase. But so I don't think there's anything we can, do to reinforce that it's a over umbrella legislation. Yeah.
So you say those are on the inside of the windscreen or on the dash?
Yeah, next to where your tax disc would be. Yeah.
Right. Yep. Straight.
And we did request the government not to delay that change, but
I was going to ask, I didn't get a chance to ask the Motor Caravan Association whether they've put any effort into it. Yeah, because a lot of the angst is coming from that. And whether they obviously lobby that they're moving on that, because their members are probably compliant. But it's the non-members who aren't complying that causing most of the concern out in the public.
So sticking with enforcement, there was also a question around what data can we use to circle back a year from now on hotspots and make more site-specific adjustments. So I might just let Amy talk to that one, but I mean, the general response there is that the program collects data on hotspots, and then that informs what regulatory enforcement action occurs on a site. Anything else to add to that?
No, so we collect information during the day. The ambassadors now can geotag pictures and locations where they've seen issues, and we can sort of build up a visual picture. But obviously we get the RFSs through the system in as well, and they're split into two about sort of behaviour, bylaw inquiries, or signage requests, or for enforcement. And we do catch up regularly on what we're seeing come through the system and how we can address that through both arms of the responsible camping programme.
Our team assesses that quite regularly as well, what complaints are coming in, which locations, and we've got a really knowledgeable team that have been doing this for a number of years now that pick up on hotspots really quickly and engage really quickly, so we can tackle those.
A snap, send, solve type notification, you wouldn't be able to enforce on that basis, though, would you? A photo showing someone parked in the wrong place with their number.
Needs a warranted officer too.
Yeah. Because that's, I think, people's concern as well, is that some of these areas are far flung and not necessarily easy to get to quickly. And by then, even if there was someone available to go, they might have gone anyway. So it might be later in the day. And
generally, those RFSs are coming through as they occur, and our team have been at the moment when we're as cost neutral as we are, there is the ability for the officers to receive those immediately overnight and attend to those within the time frame.
Right.
So they are attending those as they come in, those complaints. So they will be attended to within the roughly within a couple of hours.
Okay.
We have got the ability to scale up and scale down.
Yeah.
So if we had a hotspot,
Yeah.
let's say it was in Kingston, Macquarie, any of those areas that are further out,
Yeah.
we can easily scale up, target it hard,
Yeah.
resolve it, pull back.
Right.
So there is that ability to scale up when an issue is of significance.
Okay.
How long does it take to warrant an officer to train a person to do that or to scale up? Is it a hard process for you to recruit and implement?
Yeah, no, it's actually quite easy that we've got a really good relationship with our contractors. And so before we get to summer, we actually work out the hours that we need. They actually have quite a lot of staff, not spare, but they can bring in to plus, they're all warranted under the all the legislation that we actually get them to enforce. So if we need to scale up, it's pretty immediate. Like we can get them to if we say we need to do an extra hour in the night, we can do that. They've got staff to do it. So yeah.
If there's a level of urgency, like say if it is overnight and someone wants someone moved on, I think Snaps and Solve would be the least urgent way of contacting, getting something happening, wouldn't it? Just phoning in the most urgent and then emailing it.
My understanding is that Snaps and Solve itself has actually changed just recently within the last week or so.
Okay.
I believe it is more instantaneous now than it has been in the past.
Okay.
So any of those avenues, email is probably slowest because it's
Right.
you have to wait till the next business day for somebody to enter them in the system.
Okay.
But phoning up or Snaps and Solve, my understanding is that it's now fairly immediate.
Leading on to that, from that then, obviously, if there's any money left over from the enforcement side of it, from fining, does any of that go towards additional signage around, particularly if there's a hotspot, so that might also tell people who aren't camping what to do if they see someone who is. Is there ability to put up more signage around some of these areas?
They are separate budgeting lines.
Right.
So any revenue that comes in from freedom camping and parking goes back into the bigger pot of council money, if that makes sense. But our aim for being cost neutral is the fact that we want to make sure that we are within that, not that we are trying to make more than that. We're not trying to make money or anything like that. It's just that we want to make sure that we are covering the costs of us going out there.
So we couldn't put any of that revenue towards more facilities or signage, like more toilets or rubbish, level of service and things like that.
Goes back to the pot, so it goes back
to
up
be
to
decided upon,
the
wouldn't it? Yeah.
council.
Can I just say clarification on that, because I know 320,000 was the cost recovered, but what was the cost to have enforcement vehicles, cabin ambassadors and all the other stuff?
So that's a different cost line because the ambassador program is different to regulatory team.
Right,
Yeah.
so if you add that, it's not cost neutral. I'm just trying to see clarity around the overall sort of where the money goes.
No, it's a good question.
Enforcement is cost neutral, the rest of the program, no.
Right.
Correct.
Okay, and enforcement doesn't include the ambassadors.
No, that's an education program.
Okay, and that costs how much?
For the previous summer, it cost 330K, and that was wages, fleet vehicles, communications, printed resources, some digital advertising as well, and signage, yeah.
So that's probably where that might have been our confusion then, that
Yeah,
the cost, I think we were probably thinking that it was all one cost, but it's separate cost for enforcement and there is from the ambassadors.
in previous years, we had MB funding, so this was the previous summer was the first summer that we didn't have that MB funding. I think the previous year that we got 495,000, and we did use a portion of that for increased enforcement as well across the district. So that money was split through a couple of avenues. Yeah,
And there's no more MB funding,
they've indicated there's no more funding.
no surprises.
So just to clarify, the enforcement costs, what is that sum again?
We're about 160 to 190,000 a year. Roughly, it depends on, if we need to scale up, obviously that's going to increase our costs. But the tickets will offset that as well.
So any additional signage would come out of the ambassador freedom camping sort of budget line or some area.
Yeah.
Okay.
And some of that money that is made within regulatory and infringements goes back into that pot, and some of that is used elsewhere within the organisation.
And Yeah, we are trying to work with our colleagues in voting or parks on signage and whether there's some opportunities there to work together around budgets. At the moment, we're having to think that way.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
So a sign at the moment would come from your budget or roading?
This coming year, we have no signage funding, so it will depend on where the signs are. So the car park will be talking to the roading team. If it's other signage, like we're putting more reserve signage up, that would be parks. So yeah, we are having to have those discussions with our colleagues and other teams.
Any other enforcement questions that we haven't traversed before we move on to?
The only other one I've got was that comment that was made about an enforcement agreement with Lynn's. Is that even a thing? Or? It was one of the last submitters yesterday.
It requires investigation.
Yeah.
So in the past, enforcement have taken a delegation with the Department of Conservation when we received that MB funding.
Right.
So if it's possible with Lynn's, I'm not sure. So the default position for Lynn's land is it's not permitted. There's no freedom camping permitted on any Lynn's land in the Queensland Lakes District. It's a different starting position than local authority land. They do have the power to appoint their own enforcement officers, but in informal conversations, they've told us that that's not something they would consider or they don't have budget for. So the answer is it just needs further investigation as to whether they've done that with other councils, whether it's legally allowed, yeah, I suppose, as well as the other thing.
Under the old act, there was no, it was fairly unclear the role of Lynn's and DOC under the Freedom Camping Act.
Right.
And then the new, and that's why we had particularly the DOC delegation, that was the MB funding, but with the amendment that was made recently under the Freedom Camping Act, it made it really clear what abilities DOC and Lynn's have under the Freedom Camping Act now, and it prescribes that ability to appoint officers. So they have the ability to manage their land under the new Freedom Camping Amendment.
Do they also have the ability to apply blanket prohibition across DOC and Lynn's? Can they, are the local authorities the only ones that actually have to enable it on our land? Like DOC and Lynn's can say no.
No, it's enabling on DOC land as well. Lynn's is the only one that's got a different starting position, is my understanding.
Okay. So this next slide is about rural roads. It sets out, so just we super cognizant that there was a lot of submissions on the approach that the draft bylaw takes into rural roads, which is a restricted approach with conditions. And so we thought it might be helpful for the panel to set out what we see to be the range of different options that are available for managing freedom camping under on the rural road network. And so there's A through to E up here. I'll just take you through them briefly. So the first option A there is to rely on the default position under the Act, which is, as we described earlier, that sort of highly enabling approach. It would allow that uncontrolled impacts essentially across those three Section 11 areas. You'd still have those enforcement obligations. It might be more straightforward, but wouldn't be, in terms of there wouldn't be any conditions that need to comply with other than self-containment. And it isn't particularly well supported by submissions or technical assessment. Option B is what we've got in the draft bylaw currently. It's what officers are recommending. Option C is an amended restricted approach. So essentially that is option B's details there, but with some further amendments potentially around some of the conditions, or perhaps a new innovative approach. If the panel is minded to go that way, we can talk about that in due course. Option D is to apply a prohibited approach. So that would prevent freedom camping on all rural roads. which would be very highly restrictive, not well supported by our technical assessment, supported by submitters, but again, enforcement obligations remain to make sure that was being complied with. And lastly, option E would be to look to defer, to essentially remove the rural roads approach from the bylaw, have officers undertake some more work in terms of how that might be managed. Obviously, that would mean that the default position would apply under the Act in the meantime for rural roads, which takes us back to option A, and costly and time-consuming approach with an uncertain outcome. So, so yeah, just thought we'd present those to you as like a continuum of different options. And we've got, yeah, obviously we've got Colin to help us help answer questions in regard to access and health and safety issues related to transport and traffic. And Peter has arrived, who is across all of the reporters and provide us with answers to questions as well.
Just to interject there, to cover off questions that you've already asked around option C, is if we were to look at speed limits on rural roads, what we've done is filtered out roads above 70 km/h. And if you do that, that eliminates virtually every rural road in the district.
That would be consistent with the report, though, would it not?
And the submissions.
The advice.
Well, it's
But is it legal to do that?
we've got, so the conditions that have been recommended in the draft bylaw manage the access and health and safety concerns on those roads. So Colin perhaps can interject when it comes to the upshot is that the draft bylaw is not inconsistent with what's been recommended in the TNT report, because the conditions manage the health and safety and access issues despite the speed limit.
Right. So yeah, so that's the intention, that the restrictions that have been applied to those areas allow the higher speed environment areas to be included.
Yeah, sorry, if I can just add to that, yeah, by providing a 5 meter distance between the parked vehicle and the live traffic lane provides a safe enough distance for occupants to get out of the vehicle and do the freedom camping activities that they want to do, even in a high speed road environment. As anyone that pulls into a lay-by or a stopping area or a passing area does in any event.
Thank you.
Is there not a consideration when you're pulling off back onto a 100k road? I've heard from one person who was, keen to put a freedom camping area on the top of this hill near Harware, and it's on a corner on a 100k road, and I can imagine it'd have a lot of traffic problems because a slow camper van coming out in a blind corner when the traffic's moving fast is the danger. So it's not so much how far off the road they are, it's them entering back at that speed without a pull off and without a sort of way to get up to speed, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sorry, yes. So that is why we've identified, so realistically, the only locations that would meet the criteria for a 5 meter distance from the edge of the live traffic lane is likely to be in an existing pullover area, lay-by, stopping area, which are invariably located where you will have adequate sight distance to see any vehicles that are approaching, so that you can enter the mainline traffic in a safe manner. If we were not to have this 5 meter or any distance, then that's effectively anyone pulling up on the side of a road, which could be on a blind bend. Most locations for a lay-by or passing or stopping area will be in a safe location for that vehicle to then pull off again and enter the live traffic lane.
I guess to echo some of the submissions, their point is that if we have a restricted road and there isn't a dedicated safe 5 meter off, but we still say that it's restricted, it's disingenuous to put that in the bylaw to say that that's an option, if that makes sense. So like if we were to be practical for both people or more useful for people trying to be compliant, would we not identify those areas on rural roads that do have dedicated stops 5 meters outside and then take that approach? I guess that's what I'm trying to sort of understand more.
Yeah, and looking through the submissions, I did pick that up. That there's quite a few indicating, well, you know, perhaps we should do a site specific assessment and, you know, and identify what those sites are. And you know, that could have some merit and providing signs to indicate where that could happen. However, my understanding is part of the bylaw is that we don't necessarily have to do a site specific assessment, but it could be a solution to actually then identify the locations. It would take quite a bit of work to do that, but it is an option.
If I can, thank you. I kind of ended up coming at this from 3 different themes, 1 being clarity, 2 being cost, and 3 being care. And if I think about the clarity one on the rural roads, if most of them are unsuitable, my concern is that we're just creating a bylaw that's actually kind of unenforceable by design, and we're not getting clarity, because I ask myself, if we're struggling to understand it and having to read the detail and the level that we have, how are the public actually going to understand it and comply with it easily? Or are we setting up confusion and conflict between our residents and our camping visitors that we want to make feel welcome? And would we get more clarity about it around a suitable site-only approach and practice? And what would be the minimum that would be able to deliver on that without being seen to be too restrictive? So that sort of thinking around the clarity, but I'll also just speak for a second on the care one, because I think when it came to the rural roads bit, what I'm really concerned about is we've heard from agriculture, viticulture and horticulture that they really need to be able to safely access their land to carry out their work. And that we're creating risk by forcing these vehicles to keep driving around looking for legal places that they're allowed to stop. And I've got concern with that at night, even with a 5 metre rule, that if you're pulling off in the dark, it's hard to judge roading surfaces. It's hard to judge where culverts are. I can speak to this with experience. I put a ute into a culvert in the night, trying to find a safe place to park it off a rural road. It cost us 25 grand to sort out. It's a expensive mistake. Brings me back to cost. But what environmental risks are we actually running if we do end up with people stopping informally because there isn't a suitable site, you know? And I'm concerned about, we heard about roads like Macetown, Skippers, Rutherford, where I'm thinking we almost need to really define sensitive areas and go just not in those areas where there may not be reserves. Or I had a bit of a look at like Waitaki and Dunedin and looked at their maps, and there's a lot of just no-goes at those dairy turning circles, and I'm concerned that we just haven't done the work and that we're going to go out there and create this tension and conflict. I'm kind of wondering whether we could do it, like take a bit of a staged test approach to it, where we could look at specifying some sites. We got some good feedback on some sites that perhaps would be workable. If we could specify some test sites and we could look at these metrics that we could come back to in a year from now. And I was taking on board some of the submitters' feedback that how did it actually operate without a bylaw this year? Like we had to jump on some hotspots, we had to respond to some stuff. But if we kind of tested it out a bit and well, this is how far we could take it in the first 12 months, revisit it, I'm just concerned that we're going to end up with something that's unenforceable, really expensive, and still at risk of legal challenge if we don't get it right, and also at risk of damaging our relationship with some of our social license around both parties, where I just really heard from those rural users that these aren't all recreational spaces. These are agriculture, viticulture, horticulture, and those primary production capabilities are important as well, I think, in our district. I haven't even got into the bit about human waste and environmental impacts yet, but I've got some comments around those as well. But I just think, yeah, have we got resources in place to realistically monitor and enforce this summer, or will costs spiral? And could we look at doing the work around a targeted sites approach? Does that mean coming back to some of the consideration on, dare I say it, some of the reserve areas that were talked about or might be suitable? But I'm concerned we're going out really with a broad stroke that's open to quite a bit of challenge.
Comments?
It was a long rant, sorry.
Yeah, just I addressed the enforcement matter earlier, and in our view, the enforcement challenge exists across every single option apart from what actually exists. We have an enforcement obligation no matter what we go with here. So it's whether the panel decides it wants more structured approach for enforcement, or whether it wants to still have the obligation for enforcement but with a less structured approach. So that's the first point. In terms of how we could work to better define these areas, I think there is an opportunity that the team have over time to look at potentially informally identifying what areas might meet the conditions, and I'll let you guys speak to that in terms of how that might work. But I think that yeah, there are ways that we can communicate how it works outside of the bylaw. I don't think the bylaw needs to provide all of the answers in and of itself. I thought else we'll end up creating something that's more complex, something that's more costly, something that's more subject to challenge. So yeah, I'll let you add.
Yeah, I'll try and answer. There were a few questions in there, Lisa, or a few thoughts. I suppose just some of my comments I'd make are regards to education and communication. We do make a big effort to communicate as much as we can with campers about expectations and behaviour. Obviously, that doesn't always land. People, you know, will behave how they behave at times, which is unfortunate. But we will continue to do that as part of this. So whatever the outcome around the rural roads, whereas part of bylaw, we would be reminding people of what the conditions are if we set conditions and explaining how that works. I just want to point to the fact that there is still an element of people making good decisions when they're driving on our roads. A lot of what you're talking about here is also daytime driving, and that's a lot of what we heard from submitters as well. It's not necessarily about people sleeping overnight, it is about them driving around. People will do that as visitors in this community as well. So I think we have to be really careful that we're not bundling every issue into freedom camping. There are some broader challenges there as well. We also, as part of not having a bylaw this summer, we didn't see a significant amount of issues or complaints in these rural areas.
Yeah. I'm kind of concerned too that if we don't, I'm not talking about bad campers here, I'm talking about any compliant and well-behaving camper without knowing where the sites are. You're a visitor to the area by the very nature of you being a freedom camper. You don't know where you are, right? So you're driving around randomly trying to assess a site as whether that fits all those criteria. We're adding Ks to every journey when we're trying to trend towards efficiency and carbon zero. I'd really like to see us making investment into tech where we can direct campers with the minimum amount of searching and Ks on the road to go, I know there's 2 sites there, and I get that Campermate at the moment is the best that we've got for that, and that might be a challenge around enabling one private platform to deliver on an outcome that we require. But I just think it's this, you know, how many Ks is a camper going to do in potentially unsuitable roading conditions, looking for a non-existent site where we're just making the practice more annoying than actually offering manakitanga and kaitiakitanga and whanatanga as to create that. We heard a submitter say to us, you know, that campers are not feeling not welcome here. We don't want that either. We want them to know, hey, here's a great place for you to go and freedom camp. You're going to be within reach of facilities. It's going to be a nice place for you to park up, and you're welcome. You're welcome. Not, oh my goodness, you've just driven through my lambing and whatever else we're enabling here. I'm just, I'm keen for my fellow colleagues.
There's a whole lot of things here, but
I've got a couple of points that you've alluded to that might help with some of your questions as well, that might be helpful. You were talking about, and you covered some of it.
Yeah, I haven't, but you go.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that our team have to be out there regardless. So we, under the Freedom Camping Act, we have to cover the entire district with enforcement regardless, because we have to look across all of these rural roads, all these areas for people who are not self-contained. So for us, we're out on the same beats, regardless of what rules are put in place, which do we put.
From no rules to all rules, you're out there anyway.
We're out there anyway. Yeah, so that's one thing to cover off. The second part is from experience. We've been doing this a long time. We've been covering these roads for a very long time. And I think some of the good behaviour we are seeing currently is because we've had very good enforcement and rules in place. So we're still seeing a little bit of good behaviour from that previous rules that we've had. The longer you leave that open, we will see a creep of bad behaviour and hotspots like Park Street pop up across the district. The longer you leave that, because the word gets out, the longer you leave it. So it's just a couple of points that I wanted to cover off that you asked.
So you know where the good sites are.
Well, not the good sites.
So it's
people
the
like to though.
Well, but it might not be as big a piece of work as we anticipate, because if you do know our network and you know where good campers are going, are we able to inform that suitable site approach in practice more readily than we think?
Well, I think, as you mentioned, we haven't really seen hotspots in rural areas, so that isn't an issue that we're seeing at the moment. So yes, that campers are likely pulling off in areas, but unless they're displaying any behaviour that of concern to residents in that area, we wouldn't really be hearing about it. And so,
yeah, I guess to speak to the submitters' concerns is that when they see their road or a road near them, say that it's, allowed with restrictions on a bylaw, then they'll read it and go, okay, well, people will go searching now, because if they're trying to be compliant, they'll look and see that they can go there, versus maybe previously when there isn't the same direction in order to do that. It's just by nature of how this is presented, and I think a lot of the frustration is around trying to make something intuitive for people to be compliant in the way that they're wanting to be, versus something that sort of ticks the boxes, but anyone reading it is a little sort of like miffed around how to actually do it right or wrong, in which case they can just sort of argue the point of not quite having the clarity to make the right decision, if that makes sense. I know that's sort of like partly to do with the comms piece, but I think from our perspective, we don't want to put out something that few people understand or know how to do the right thing. We want it to be straightforward, so people who are complying go, right, that's where I can, that's where I can't. It's straightforward, it's obvious. I think to Lisa's point, she's saying at the moment, it looks like I can go down there and maybe there's a spot we don't. You're saying that, oh, we know all the spots that people go in. And then so it's like, well, then the specific site assessment might not be as costly as, it's basically like, there is a way to make this all work.
That balance I'm trying to reach is, do we sign for where you're allowed, or do we sign for where you're not allowed? What's the better education piece to go after?
Yeah.
so I'm concerned we're going to spend the next hour and a half just talking about the rural roads. We go back to these options. I mean, I think what the submitters who aren't in favour of the rural road restrictions would be wanting would be the prohibition of all rural roads, but I don't know whether that's viable and whether that would be, so that's option D, but that would be open to being challenged, I would imagine, just as we have been on the previous one.
Well, as per the slide, the technical assessment, it just doesn't support the approach, and we'd be telling you something different if we had evidence of a lot of issues with rural roads. We don't have that.
I think what's happened is that the submitters that we've had, they've seen the maps and all these roads are coloured, and it's frightening.
Yep.
Because it looks like it's saying to people, there are camping spaces here, you just have to go and find one, and they'll be easy to find, it's all over the place. Whereas what we've heard is that there aren't many places that do meet all the restrictions. I know the Freedom Camping Act says that if we want to apply restrictions, we need to identify the area, either by map or by description. Is it feasible to not show all these roads highlighted on a map, but put a description and just say, you know, these rural roads, you know, are restricted areas if you can meet these restrictions without identifying, you know, specifically on a map?
No, the act
Coloured road.
requires that we need to mark the place if it's prohibited or restricted. The only avenue to not mark would be to rely on the default assumption in the Freedom Camping Act, and then you don't have the conditions.
So what I was trying to get to was whether the description avenue would be
Oh, sorry, or you can list them.
right.
So yes, there is an option to list the roads as opposed to,
Not me.
mapping. I understand that's what the act provides for,
Right.
but so
Because it does say describe the roads, doesn't it? And I suppose naming the road is one way of describing it.
So can I just get clarification? You said that all our rural roads are above 70, so they're restricted and you can't go there anyway.
Effectively, I mean, look, we've obviously had 24 hours between receiving the question.
but pretty much,
The GIS mapping that we've been able to do, yes.
In small areas that people below 70.
So then the education piece around that is pretty much like all of Queenstown's rural roads are too fast for you to camp on.
Not every
It's
single
not where the
one.
conditions come in
Yeah.
to mitigate that. So the restricted option provides the ability to manage that risk.
With those maps though,
It doesn't trump the other bits.
what I wasn't able to determine, just from the resolution, have we covered every rural road on those maps? Why are there rural roads that aren't highlighted? Could you discuss
not to our knowledge, no, every rural road should be identified.
every rural? So all of the ones that are covered are all, that covers every rural road in the district. Yeah.
There were questions from submitters around some roads not marked, but they're private. Or
Yeah.
Just having a look at the Christchurch one, because it came up, and it's a map of like the zone more so than the road. I'm just wondering how much of the frustration that people are having are around the difference between lining it out on a map versus having a zone. Because it's just harder to understand, and everybody looks at their own road, whether it's on there or not, rather than understanding that it's a whole rural area that has restrictions.
What I was getting to with my question about the roads that are highlighted, was in people's concerns that these roads that are highlighted, there's not many places that you can actually meet all those restrictions, but that's actually the outcome we're looking for, isn't it? We're looking for highlighting that all our rural roads under the Freedom Camping Act would be open to camping on anyway. We're wanting to apply restrictions to make it safer, but we can only do that by highlighting all these roads or naming them. But if you then apply the restrictions that you have to meet to camp somewhere, it does limit the places that people can do it. I think that's what's worried people, is that a road's highlighted, so it means that it's open slather for camping,
It is
without
legal.
making that connection that you need to be able to meet these restrictions to be able to do that legally under the bylaw. Yeah. So I think it is achieving, the way it is set up, it is achieving what we're wanting to achieve out of it.
I
But I
mean,
think,
it's providing more controls than what we
Yeah.
had that we passed. So
I just think it's the way people are
That's the visual communication.
seeing
right?
it, you know, yeah, and not connecting the restrictions with the roads. And I don't know whether there's any way that we can do that.
Well, again, I think it comes back to a really great communications campaign and how we educate people that just because they're coming into a district and seeing a road and map does not necessarily mean they should camp on that road. And yes, I know that sounds disingenuous, which is what a lot of people said, but
Yeah.
actually this allows us to say this whole area has some conditions around it and, again, push forward on that expectation around behaviour as campers come into our district. So for example, when they come into the district, if they're on Camper Mate, we can get an immediate notification on their phones.
Right.
Telling them we have this bylaw, these are the rules.
Yeah.
So there are different mechanisms we can be implementing to
I
make
think-
sure
I
people are aware
think-
of that.
yeah, I mean, like, I think we're all coming around to the realization of what it is, and I think so much can be solved just by like showing a different kind of map. You know, and I think that's what's, I guess, part of the direction is that it's around how people understand this more so than the settings that are there. I think is a lot of the clarity of how we present this.
So can I just clarify? So you're talking about, so the Christchurch example there where
Yeah,
the zone is marked out to say this is a restricted freedom camping area, but the specific roads aren't listed on that map. But I'm assuming they would be, as Luke said, they would have to be listed
they'd
in
be
the
probably listed in the Bible.
in the actual bylaw document.
Yeah.
So it could be, I suppose that's a discussion we have to look at about how that's presented. If that was one thing.
Yeah, I had a look at Waitaki's as well, and they kind of, they did it sort of like that list of conditions, but you know, like one for their urban one, they just had not within line of sight of any residential dwelling, and I thought if that submitter that was like, she was saying she could reach out and touch them, so that.
We can't put a clause like that in there.
I was going to say that is an amenity issue.
Yeah.
So again,
That's why we-
indicate.
So they haven't had their bylaw challenged, is it?
Well, they don't, they have the same numbers, volume is the issue. Yeah.
And yeah, and you know, they've literally just specified no washing in any water bottoms. They've just kind of listed those behaviours that they didn't want to have happen. You know, the adverse effects of freedom camping are managed at hotspots. Access for other users is maintained for other uses. It just seems a lot kind of simpler to understand the bullet points.
I
So
would
that's
suggest that they don't have the number of
Yeah.
issues to deal with that we do. Yeah, the number of volume of visitors, so, yeah.
So can we about a zone? I know the law, the act specifically says you can't put a blanket prohibition on, but can you put I mean, that looks almost like a blanket, but it's a blanket restricted area, isn't it? Is that acceptable? Because then we're not identifying individual roads with coloured lines, we're just saying all the rural roads within this zone.
Yeah, I
Might
think
be the whole district.
the effect is the same, basically, but the problem with the Christchurch example, in my view, is that it actually identifies a bunch of private property that's subject to the bylaw, which
Yeah.
is a bit of a nonsense because
Okay.
private land isn't subject to the bylaw. So our approach is actually more.
It's more
Well,
accurate. Yeah. I hear what you're saying.
I think it is just it's a trying to find the best way to communicate.
Yeah,
No, I understand what you're saying.
yeah,
And because I think that's why we get so many submissions, because people haven't fully understood what it's achieving. And they've just seen this road says you can camp anywhere on it. But there's no way that meets the restrictions, so there's a conflict there. But
And I'm a bit concerned that we've only heard from those submitters that have had a look at the roads and that we, in effect, could apply that kind of feedback across all the roads, because if they'd been taken with that granular detail, we'd find the same challenges as being over 70, no hard stand. Again, what's the definition of a hard stand? Just all of those vagaries, which,
So to go back
and
to
how
your
we
options,
get clear on that.
option C, the amended approach with further amendments. Did you mention before what those, or any ideas what those amendments could be along the lines of?
I mean, yeah, so we talked about some of them, I think, you know, using a speed limit approach, looking at amending some of the other conditions such as the setback requirements, what sort of surface the vehicle can be located on,
Number of nights.
stayed, that we've introduced the 10-metre setback from a water body, we've recommended that in the hearing, in response to submitters' concerns. So, yeah,
Most of those are already sort of under consideration anyway as restrictions.
yeah, so I mean, it's sort of playing around the edges, to be honest, and yeah, the effect is essentially the same. It's just sort of depends what the panel prefers to control and what nature and scale it prefers to control it. The effect would be much the same. However, if you applied a speed, as we discussed earlier, you know, if we apply a speed limit approach, the effect would just be essentially to prohibit most rural roads, 99% of them I would suggest. So yeah, it's a tricky one. That one wouldn't be well supported by the technical assessment, so.
Yeah. I mean, if we're using that 5 metre clearance, then a lot of those, like, so Colin said, that a lot of those areas are, you know, metal dumps or lay-bys anyway that have been quite often set up in the past for heavy vehicles to pull in and out of for road operations. So, you know, by default, I guess they are okay to be able to pull out into traffic as a heavy vehicle, so camper van can do the same thing. So I guess we're, and there's no sense, I guess, in putting a speed limit restriction on it.
We don't have to just decide now, we can keep moving and then come
Yeah.
back to this.
How do we, I correct my questions about, I think there was a bit around enabling access for other, enabling other users, and I was sort of reading that, you know, we had some submitters talk about access for kayaking and all of those bits, and if we end up with volume of campers and we're restricting the back in the days when it was really hot spot down at Lake Hayes and things like that, where we just couldn't get to the lake because of camping. Do we have to deliver enough space for all other users? Like, how do you get that balance right of having space for campers and it being fair for other users if you can't talk about recreational values because they're amenity values?
What about access?
Access, yeah. That's one of the conditions.
So we can just say they must enable access for all other legitimate users of that area.
So in terms of the rural roads, there's just a condition that requires another space for another vehicle on that wherever the location is. But are you referring to Camp Hill Bridge, which is maybe more a specific restricted area rather than a rural road?
Yeah, which is, I think that was the submission you were referring to, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wonder if it might be
Move to that. slide.
Yeah.
but it's over to you, Chair, how you'd like to.
Yeah, well, we can,
Yeah.
obviously we'll have to come back
Yeah.
anyway, but we might as well keep on going.
Okay, so actually, the next was the urban roads approach, but we didn't we didn't hear a lot of opposition. In fact, most submitters supported the urban roads approach, which prohibits freedom camping on all in all business commercial areas and residential areas too. Yeah, over to you if you'd like to discuss any matters in regard to that, or we can move on to the specific restricted areas.
Yeah, when I think there was generally support for prohibiting in urban areas. Obviously, other than the sites that have been identified where it is permitted. There were some specific locations that people brought up in the submissions that suggested that we need to add a few more prohibited areas, and like Rutherford Road was an example.
That's a rural road currently.
Right, oh, yes, true, yeah.
And I have, we have addressed that in the hearing report, Rutherford Road issue.
Right.
I don't know if you recall reading that in there potentially.
Do now, but what did it say?
So there's quite a lot to read. The view that we provided in the report was that the end of Rutherford Road, which is sort of like this informal parking area for Lake Hayes at the moment, we think that it wouldn't meet the conditions set out in the rural roads approach, and therefore freedom camping would be prohibited along Rutherford Road and at the end of the road, because it's a turning area. So in terms of the submitter's concerns, acknowledge those, but we think that the bylaw manages that.
Was
We're just
that,
making it a prohibited
yeah,
area.
that Rutherford Road one, I wondered, is there any ability for us to specify highly sensitive environmental areas? Because that is a freshwater spring, there's nesting green, we've got all of this wetland and biodiversity. But right, that would probably be the most, it's the inlet. Right?
Yeah.
It's where the fresh spring comes into the lake. So just the district plan protection around Lake Hayes, I would hope would have a little bit of oomph of putting a buffer around the lake that says that whole lake is a highly sensitive environmental space, and there might be others, you know, whether it's Tucker Beach or the wetlands and the bird nesting sites up there that we can specifically look at from a habitat kind of perspective.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge with that one is that we're constrained as to what effects we can consider. So the effects that have to be managed or have to be experienced and therefore we can manage have to be where the freedom camping is taking place, and freedom camping can only take place on local authority land. So any impacts on, even though they might occur or be experienced on land outside of the local authority area, they are outside the scope of what we can manage.
Sorry, I sidetracked you a little bit by going to Rutherford Road when we were talking about fencing. But I think generally what's provided for urban roads, I think, was supported. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
So I think we can say we're happy with that.
Yeah.
One take.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nice to celebrate this whole one.
So yeah, there's just specific restricted areas. I've got just a table here, which is from the SOP and the report, just to prompt any discussions that you'd like to have across any of those. We responded in the hearing report along a number of matters raised by submitters on some of these, including the hours of arrival and departure, which were amended to achieve more consistency and to be aligned with their use, but in particular we wanted to make sure that it was easy to understand, so that consistency was sought through amending the hours of arrival and departure. We introduced some arrival hours and departure hours for Camp Hill as well. And I don't think there was any other significant or material amendments that came through for any of those.
One of the concerns that was raised, especially in LNB car park, was having open fires and, the fire threat. Is there an ability within restrictions to say cooking only inside the vehicle or things like that in order to mitigate?
Yes, that would be within scope. There is so the conditions for all of the specific restricted areas say light no fires outside of the vehicle. But if the panel's minded, they could go further. Conscious that there are areas in the district like that do have elevated risk of fire, and TNT have provided some advice around potential signage at these sites to alert people to the fact that there is elevated fire risk in these locations. So that was something that we could do, but if the panel's minded, if they want to go further in the conditions for specific areas, then that would be within scope.
Yeah,
I think we need to go as hard as we can on fire, because a hot cooker around a high road edge, even 5 meters in, is the real fire risk. And we heard from particularly up around Moat Lake and a lot of those other areas that I know we strayed away from rural, but yeah, cooking within a vehicle. I just think of a lot of those fires that sparked off through Central Otago over the last summer, and many of those were just, hot under car bodies or hot motorbike engines, or, somebody throwing a cigarette out their car window. I think those are 3 examples of fires in Central in the last 24 months. So anything we can do to cool down the surrounding environment around our campers, I think we should.
Panel's likely aware, but also just reiterating that the draft bylaw has a mechanism by which, when, for example, non-item service closed due to fire risk, that car park can be closed for freedom camping. That's a name for it in instructions.
So could we
So
do
temporary.
temporary?
Temporary.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And could we do temporary closures for events if we needed, like, to fully open up our car park capacity for something? We could say no, freedom camping.
There's also been amendments that we recommended for your consideration around any person being able to apply to temporarily prohibit or change the conditions in a restricted freedom camping area, so that it would, for example, at Camp Hill Bridge, where a number of submitters raised concerns with regard to the recreational use. There is a pathway that has been recommended in the report and an attachment D that would allow for council to receive applications that would temporarily change.
So if Mount Sparrow College is going to have a kayaking day, they could apply for freedom camping to be suspended for a day or two.
And they, well, yeah, they could, council would need to consider the decision using sexual level matters, but, they can apply.
They're there every week. It's not like a one-off. I think that's the argument.
Well, the other issue that was raised about it, though, was which car park it was going to best apply to, the one on the other side of the river. I think you asked that question, Cody, did you?
Oh, yeah, I think it's different land anyway.
Private
Yeah.
land.
Right.
I think what they were concerned about is that if freedom camping was allowed at Camp Hill, it would force more people to camp on the other side of the road, which the landowner would not like. Well, it would remove permission. There was some complexities to the.
So the thing about these restricted or specific areas that I noticed though from the report was that some of them had a really high level of opposition and low level of support. All the ones in Wanaka, all the other people.
Except for the rec centre.
Funnily enough, so Boundary Street car park at a high, well, relatively high for the other car parks in Queenstown. Penalty Domain, Gibson Highway, Flint Street, but then going up a level in magnitude was the Wanaka Beacon Point, Allenby Place and Camper Road. Large numbers of people opposing them. So are we in a position to take that feedback on board and say, well, no, people weren't supportive of freedom camping spaces in those places?
I mean, you can, it's a panel discretion to recommend that to council. However, we think there's risk to the process in that decision, that recommendation on the basis that the reporting that we've got from our technical experts recommends that we consider providing for freedom camping in those locations.
And the only aspects we can consider is the area health and safety and access, correct? And so community sentiment doesn't have a weighting legally.
It depends if that, I mean, that does in regard to if they are having, you know, if, in regard to those three matters. Yeah, but given that, you know, a portion of those areas available to freedom campers for a limited number of hours, as opposed to the whole car park all the time, it's a balancing act which we think we managed to achieve. But there is what the panel could consider, for example, is changing the number of car parks that might be present, or might be available, changing the hours that might apply to that specific restricted area. Those are the sorts of things that might be less risky in terms of making amendments rather than saying no freedom camping at all.
I think one of the fears is that the community's seen people abuse the rules and our ability to enforce it is limited. And so they know that sort of like give an inch, take a mile type of thing with them. So it's not so much that I think the, you know, the amount of them is disproportionate. It would be fair if people complied, but the reality is people are finding that there's a lot of non-compliance and that sort of the herd mentality. Is there an ability to have better enforcement tools like a camera at these sites in order to better manage like overreach?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about what and this is separate to the bylaw, but we are going to test potentially this summer the Luggate Bridge site using cameras and using a tool that would allow us to have a booking system and also register those number plates.
Yep.
I think rolling it out across all of these sites would be pretty pricey. But again, we need to be speaking with our colleagues in enforcement about what does the future of technology around enforcement look like.
Enforcement can happen under CCTV footage,
Yeah.
as long as it's a warranted officer that is reviewing that footage. So that happens through parking currently.
Yeah.
It can happen, but it is a costly exercise to set up as well.
Well, I guess, sorry, just to follow on that thread, I mean, does Wanaka Rec Centre already have cameras? I guess it's like.
I don't think they have cameras inside it. Like the Queenstown Rec Centre does.
Through each year, not through the wider car park, but they do within the immediate building footprint. So again, there's capacity, but it's the cost. But certainly technology is going to have a part going forward.
Yeah, I just think like if is there a possibility that we could recommend that we enable these sites with technology to be able to enforce? So until we invest in the technology, like, that's just sort of the practicality I'm trying to think of, is that like, I agree that as presented, it seems reasonable. My concern is that people will abuse it and we won't have enough enforcement to really uphold what the real law is. And so my direction could be finding a better management tool in order to enable these spaces for freedom camping to happen better. In which cases can that become a condition of that enablement?
One thing I will say is that these areas, these specific areas that are listed are all on our regular patrols. So they are being targeted at a very high level already.
Okay.
So, yeah, introduction of CCTV does assist and it would make things simpler. Yeah, but at the same time, we are achieving what we need to achieve currently under our current patrols in these locations.
Okay.
With CCTV as well. I find personally, when I'm organising enforcement, it's actually better to come through the wardens on the ground, because CCTV, it's going back to an office, issuing an infringement on the camera, posting it out to that person, getting it in the mail. That could be a rental car company.
Right.
It could be a month later before the actual offender gets it. You're not getting an instant compliance with the ticket physically on the windshield. So while CCTV is great, it does have its limitations in terms of getting that instant, like,
that's a good point.
the compliance that you really want to see, and then to wake up and go, crap.
Yeah,
Shouldn't be.
appreciate it.
If I can ask a question about the Flint Street one, one of the submissions asked if we would consider 3 instead of 5, in comparison to some of the other sites there. And also talked about the fact that Flint Street's undergoing a lot of change at the moment, as far as competing use with the EV charging, looking at taking parks in there, and also even the redevelopment of that car park going all the way through to Marion. At the moment, it's quite a tight turning circle in there with vehicle movement, and the concern being that 5 vehicles of camper van size, just getting in and accessing it seems to be quite tight. Could you speak to why that was determined to be 5, and like there wasn't even any indication as to which 5 we were talking about within that car park? There's concern there that that's not really workable at that level. Maybe, I don't know whether the TT guys did a site specific on that, or was, does 5 practically work in that space when we're also looking, like, we've got a drop in tonight on the River Reserve Management Plan that impacts that site?
So I'll let Colin talk in the first instance to his assessment. Colin, what you speak?
Yeah, hi, yeah, so these car parks we assessed as suitable candidates for freedom camping parking. The number of vehicles is a bit of an arbitrary number. We were adopting largely, roughly about 10% of the total car parking spaces. So the numbers can change. We just considered that there weren't any health and safety grounds or access issues at these car parks to actually restrict freedom camping here. And the numbers, as I said, were driven by an arbitrary number of 10% to allow other car parks to be available for the other users of those car parks.
So it's potential. Do you know whether the proposed e-vehicle charging spaces were considered within that 10%, or would they not have been deducted from the original?
We didn't have the EV charging space numbers available when we did our assessment, so we can relook at that if that information is available.
My only add-on to that is that I understand that we don't have confirmation that it will actually be in that part of the car park or a timing for that. And so there's probably situations where there may be planned things for other areas, but we're in the situation of trying to develop a bylaw with the information we have right now And with regard to the EV charging, we don't have certainty under location or number at the minute. So it took those concerns on board. But I suspect that there will be other sites with work coming up in a different process the council will need to respond to.
Because if you look at the entrance to that site, there is many obstacles to manoeuvre vans around to get in, and the concern was the number that we're putting in. I mean, just, you know,
Yeah,
the
so
pathways into it, the turning circles, all feeds
definitely
really-
defer to Duncan and Taylor on the quantum, but in terms of EV, I just was chiming in on that actually.
Yeah, no, thank you.
In terms of these car parks though, that are in urban areas, that, you know, if there wasn't support for them, a lot of that's for the same reason that there isn't support for car parking in urban streets. It's mainly for access, I guess.
But sorry, if I could just interrupt, there is a slight difference. Parking in an urban street is not a safe environment for the freedom camper activities. You know, if they've got barbecues or play stuff or pets in a car park, you're off the road, so it is a safer environment if someone wants to, you know, I don't know, walk their dog or play with their children. It's safer than a road. I wouldn't say it's totally safe being in a car park. So there is a slight difference, and we did check, although we didn't do detailed vehicle tracking. We did look at the access and negotiation for large camper vans to negotiate these car parks.
That was going to be my question, if that, you know, a bigger motorhome that also has 2 meter somewhat perimeter for containing its things outside is much larger than a regular car space. So
Yeah, correct.
confirming that number has been considered 10% of the space, not 10% of the available car parks.
10% of the number, we took an average of 10% of the number of available car parks would be allocated for camper vans. So they would be taking, so it's 10% of the car park spaces, acknowledging that's actually a bigger number of car park spaces if you've got a bigger vehicle.
Yeah, so it's 10% of the space, not 10% of the number of car
No,
parks.
Yeah.
10% of the number of spaces.
But those spaces, like I'm just
So
thinking.
the bylaw doesn't have to provide for any certain type of freedom camping vehicle. It just what we're not trying to provide for any specific large, small, it's
Yeah.
identifying
I
car
get that.
parking areas.
I guess like where I'm coming from is if Camp Hill Road, there's 15 spaces, but there were 15 large motorhomes, each space quite far away from each other. That might prohibit a lot of recreational access and actually push other people out into the road or to park somewhere else. Because they will take up more space because there's no defined lines either. So
Yeah.
some of the things that I'm foreseeing as being problematic with that approach could be in those instances there.
They would be in defined parks, so is that what I'm hearing? Like
Camp-
those big
Well, that was
parks
a
would have
suggestion.
defined parking with a sign that says this is one space.
That's correct. Apart from at Kingston, which is a more informal situation.
I mean, the Kingston one's already operating as a freedom camping area, so there's not really an issue. I don't think that one is there.
We recommended, including marked vehicle spaces in the report for Camp Hill in order to make sure that we did control the access and, you know, make sure that there's going to be sufficient space for recreational users.
I remember seeing that somewhere, I'm trying to find it.
I guess I mean, I still, and maybe it's my own mental block with some of the urban car parks. Is that there's this presumption that you should need to be able to camp for free in the middle of a busy town. You know, for the Queenstown example. When, you know, a lot of those car parks that have been identified are quite a short distance from a recognised camping ground. Which obviously isn't free, but that's why those places were established for people to stay in town and camp. And we've, you know, seem to have come around to the thinking that people should have the right to camp in the middle of town for free.
I'm afraid that's what they.
I know that's the problem, is that it allows that. And, you know, for me, it seems to be based on this myth that we've always camped for free anywhere we wanted to in New Zealand, but that's not my recollection of growing up in New Zealand. You know, most people that went camping for the summer holidays either stayed in a campground or they found some private land to camp on. They didn't have this right, they could just stop on the side of the road somewhere and camp for 2 weeks. But when that's an aside to the bylaw, I'm trying to sell here today, but it brings me back to why do we need to be so permissive to allow people to camp for free in the middle of town in a car park? When there are places to be provided for that very purpose.
Because Jonathan thought that there wasn't going to be enough accommodation for like.
Well, we don't know what they were thinking then, and were they thinking of the middle of towns, or were they thinking of, you know, up a river somewhere?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you completely, and I guess it's part of the frustration and some of the submitters, you know, recommending that we go to Wellington and actually start lobbying for a more nuanced law that actually creates a better environment for everybody.
Yeah. I mean, the camper van has come into town, they park there for camper vans during the day, they've got to pay for it. They get free parking all day. No, there is free parking at night, but does that need to be free camping at night? And that's what we're allowing, or we're attempting to allow. But I still have an issue with the fact that we're doing that, and we're in urban areas.
Some submitters spoke to, and not necessarily those that we heard speaking in person, but in the written submissions around the original intention of the Act was not to enable freedom camping in urban areas. Yeah, interested in your thoughts on that.
But there was also submitters saying that they really valued camping in urban areas and the opportunity to contribute back to the town and go out with Demara. So, I mean, the whole spectrum, as we all know, was
I was gonna say,
of submissions.
I mean, it's all subjective, but like, yeah, like there are responsible freedom campers in motorhomes and car parks that aren't being used overnight. And there's sort of a pragmatism that can be met in some ways. And I honestly think one Greek Centre in that back area is a pretty appropriate space to be permissive of it. So I'm not like against it. That's the only one that I feel actually like, yeah, that can make sense. That's more so than the others. So I'm relatively fine. I know people are there throughout the day anyway. And you can't stop people in camper vans parking wherever they want throughout the day.
No.
Whatever they want, I guess like a different thing. So
That's another point. I don't know how the monitoring and enforcement people deal with that either. There's a fine line between, obvious, you know, tick the clock between overnight camping and parking for the day. And there's also, you know, a slight difference between camping outside your camper van and just having a picnic outside it during the day, isn't there? So,
yeah.
The Act allows for day excursions under section 5.2,
Yeah.
so our team will need to take special consideration of that when enforcing.
So you could leave, say Flint Street, drive around the block, come back as a day excursion, park again, there's no time limit there. So you park right up till 6 o'clock and then you're back in your slot.
do you just have to get out of your car at 8 o'clock in the morning, lock it up and walk off somewhere and then you're parked for the day?
You can stay here
You don't want
and
to
permit
take
day excursion. That's where your Land Transport Act will come into effect if there's issues during the day. That is the avenue to bring in some restrictions during the day to any issues of overuse. For any particular area. Use a different piece of act.
Well,
Could be argued that's when they are making the economic
Well, that's what people see it.
contribution though, right?
Oh, but yeah, I mean, a lot of the submissions talk to the behaviour of freedom campers, you know, what they're doing in the rivers and lakes, and like, there's a distinguishment between them actually sleeping overnight and what they do in the daytime, which are two very different things under what we're doing. Is there like a definition of daytime? Like, if you're there at 5 in the morning, whatever, that's considered like nighttime, just out of curiosity. And
there's nothing defined in the act. We need to use our discretion as to what a day excursion looks like.
Yeah.
Essentially, our team issue tickets during darkness hours.
Yeah, that's the right way to put it.
Civil twilight once those.
While you mentioned the Land Transport Act, a couple of comments come up about people parking in farm gates and bus turning circles and tanker turning circles. Are you able to enforce those under the Land Transport Act?
Yeah, we'll need to look at each one case by case, but there is an ability to issue infringements for people blocking access ways, so
Yeah.
that will
Someone
be up
phoned
and
up,
running.
there's a camper van in my farm gate. You go out there and,
Also, if I can add, possibly private land beyond
yeah,
the road carriageway, so that is outside the scope of the bylaw. It, yeah, it may or may not be.
well, because that's, some people did raise that question too, no one actually knows where a boundary is unless you've got a survey with you or when you've got it that tells you where boundary lines are, but if someone's off the road carriageway and parked on private property because there's private property adjacent to the road, do you have any means of enforcing that or?
Our team have access to mapping. In the office, we've got the ability to see where a line is. We're pretty good at acknowledging or educating our team, our enforcement team, what they can and can't enforce within that. So it's
So if
for us,
someone's
it's
on-
quite easy to determine where private land and
Yeah,
where
but if someone's over the boundary just because they've pulled off the road far enough and they're on private property, can you not then?
we can't touch it.
So then
Private land
back
is
on
private
property owner to, and then, that I guess comes up as that issue with, some of the stations mentioned, that Nicholas Road, there's no fencing, you can just pull off as far as you want to go.
Private land.
reason. Yeah.
Just through the chair, and just another point about the roadways, and as Gary said, that's definitely something to look into to make sure we understand what can be enforced around blocking driveways, but again, pointing to communication, if that were included, we would educate about the fact that you can't.
Yeah.
What we're talking about, if that were approved, that you can't pull over and park across someone's driveway.
I think also, just from a behavioural point of view, I do believe a lot of responsible campers do just want to go where they've told it's acceptable, whether that is in an urban area or in a site like the Luggett Red Bridge. So the pinpointing of the map of the responsible camping sites, and then anything else outside of that scope is your choice and on you to make that decision and to plan ahead and use your best instincts to follow all the rules, I suppose.
I agree completely because there's like a psychological safety element of it, of safety.
Yeah.
One of the submissions, or maybe a few of them, spoke to like Beacon Point Road and Ellenwood Place car park. There's a few spots, it's highly desirable. I know you're talking about registration, but there'll be lots more traffic because it'll be an area that's highlighted on the map to be okay to do. So there'll be lots of people going back and forth on that road going, oh, there's not enough space and having to leave. Is there any way to manage or mitigate that, do you think, as a consequence of opening up these spaces?
The comms piece again, really about arriving early, although, without a booking system, it's difficult for people to see what the demand is for a site, I suppose. And I do agree with those submitters based on sort of the over subscription of the Red Bridge that we've seen, that the demand for freedom camping, like far outweighs what we provide in terms of sites at the moment. Accepted sites, I should say, so the booking system is one thing, but something that has weighed on my mind about a booking system is, so say you've booked and you turn up at 8 p.m. and somebody else is in your space, then there's conflict between campers, and then that's a call to the out of hours number, for council to resolve, I suppose. But then there is a behaviour change as well about, booking ahead and planning ahead. And Dave, the parks manager, always talks about the dock huts, and, you used to always just turn up to the backcountry huts, but now for the popular walks, you need to book, and everybody accepts that you need to book because it's so popular. It's like, oh, you want to do that walk, you need to book it, and you need to book it a year in advance because it's so popular, so it is a transition phase. And it might be difficult to manage, but then eventually, hopefully, we would get that behaviour change.
Do you think, is there a difference between a booking system and a registration system? So instead of being able to pre-hold, what if we investigated that when you're there, you're required to register from a QR code that says I'm here?
Like a check-in.
You're like a check-in, like the space is now occupied.
And
You
it's
can't
not-
pre-book it, but once you're in it, you need to register and say, I'm here tonight. And that way we've got a check-in time, we can police that they've left. It just gives us some better metrics around what type of vehicles we've got.
And you can.
And it could be on each sign. This is, you, if you're parked in this stop, you must use this QR code and check in.
Yeah, I'm sure that these are the things we're going to be looking at with technology. We haven't actually met and talked in detail to the possible suppliers of that technology, but absolutely there are all things we would be looking at to see how this is
I can
managed.
see the challenges with the booking system, but I can see some benefit out of a check-in that would give us a lot of data.
Luke, how many more slides have you got?
Just the one actually. It's not necessarily a short one. There's not many words on there, but so the King Road issue, we had Craig Barr talk to yesterday.
Yeah.
And yeah, officers agree that the private road should be removed from Schedule 1B. There are a range of other amendments that we haven't talked about that officers have carefully considered and recommended the panel consider, which are included in attachment D of and we need to get your recommendations on each of those or otherwise. So yeah, a few things to work through still.
Yeah.
Those amendments are very wordy as they appear in attachment D, but they summarize them really well in the executive summary of the hearing report. In terms of plain English, a large number of them have to do with adding explanatory notes. But yes, it would be good to have confirmation from the panel about next steps in the process for those changes because they come about as an outcome of the constitution.
Just a couple of before we go back to, obviously we've got a few things to resolve still, but a couple of other questions. There was a comment made, these are some of my questions as well, about leaving out the reserves. Someone questioned, might have been the Motor Caravan Association, whether that was legal to do that. Are we satisfied that we had good reasons for doing it when it was a councillor workshop? They can be controlled under the Reserves Act and Reserve Management Plans. We satisfied that is, yeah. Yes.
So we could still make an allowance under an individual reserve management plan in the future if we wanted to specify a camp area and a reserve and make accommodation for that. So we're not being overly restrictive out into the middle.
It either needs to be through a delegation from the Ministry of Conservation or a reserve management plan. So the other things we'll be looking at is to whether, which processes are appropriate and which other reserves may be considered for freedom camping in the future. There's something we would like to do some more work on with the parks team.
Can I just also add your traffic and parking bylaw under 21.2 also doesn't allow parking in a reserve. And that's in your 2018, which you adopted, and in your 2025 draft.
I'm on that panel. Are you on that panel? Like coming out? Yeah.
Not sure when that's going to be fitted in, but somewhere between now and October. No, that's good. There was a question about, a comment about needing resource consent for accommodation on roading, but I think that was missing the mark a little bit as far as this bylaw goes.
Yes, that's right. The chapter 38, I think it is, which shows space and recreation, is particularly explicit, and it says there's an advice note there which says freedom camping in the district is controlled by the council's freedom camping control bylaw. Right. But in addition to that, there's what I understand to be correct is that in order for something to be considered a recreational, a dwelling, it needs to be a building. And the building is defined under the Building Act.
Vehicle isn't a building.
Yeah, well, it is up to 2 months. But as you know, our bylaw doesn't allow. So.
Well, we can change the restriction.
Gets wheels off this building.
There is control there if someone decides to stay in very long under the district plan.
Okay. And There was a comment about Boundary Creek campsite, but that's, I mean, that's an issue for Doc. I don't know whether we. Yeah,
We
he's
did
Doc.
put a, we did,
Yeah.
Or the Boundary Creek,
They say it's temporarily closed, but it's been temporarily closed for a long time, and doesn't they why?
yeah, I believe it was to do with a consent issue with the toilet was there, so it's still open for day use, but it is closed as a campsite. I emailed the Wanaka operations manager, and she said they are scoping use for Boundary Creek, but didn't specifically mention if that would be for camping or not, but I sent her the submissions that advocated for its reopening.
Very good. Do you have any other?
I do, yeah, just sort of going back through and trying to ask every question. In terms of the consideration for 10% of the car parking spaces, and I look at L&B Park and it's there 5 allotted spaces for freedom camping. I think. I don't think there's 50 car parks.
Yeah, so just to add clarity on that, so TNT were explicit about, they gave us a potential 10% might be appropriate, but
Right.
what we did is using our site specific understanding of we went out and visited the sites, or Amy and another colleague did, and we got some advice on from colleagues on what they think.
Yes. I've visited with the parks planner, all the proposed sites, and we tested, I suppose. And now I suppose we're testing those spaces with the community.
Yeah.
You know, when we visited, mostly in the morning, that's what we saw and that's what we thought could be appropriate. But happy to be challenged and tested on, what's appropriate for access.
Looking from the top down images, maybe 13 available spaces with space outside of the vehicle if you had motorhomes. I guess the point is I could easily see that being, if there was 5 motorhomes, I could easily see that being restricted access to recreational areas for everybody else. I just think like that in particular has a lot of, it's very tight and narrow, and any sort of buffer zones, I don't think that's an appropriate amount. Yeah, I think I'd just be a bit more conservative on the numbers, given if we are going to proceed with these new areas and they're untested and they're relatively theoretical when it comes to why the amount of numbers that are on the side of, I don't want to say less is more because it's not the right expression, but you know, testing the waters in a managed way that doesn't restrict access for recreational users, because they're right at the edge of new park at Mount Iron. You know, this is right at the car park of the way this community suffered without recreational areas for a long time, and I do think that would pose a very real conflict in that space with those numbers allotted. That's just my preference.
Can I just, I think there are concerns are valid, but I would just remind you that, you know, freedom camping is an overnight activity, and would make sure that the panel is aware that we're not dealing with, like, these spaces are available to anybody else during, outside of the arrival and departure times. So, like outside of those hours, there are no access restrictions from freedom camping.
That's a fair point, but I guess like Mount Iron, people going there before work and going up, that'd be going there say 6 in the morning, at least I do, for a pre-work walk up. And also is it 2 days that you're allowed to stay there before having to leave? So there's a chance that people will stay there over those days.
You have to leave the space.
You have to leave the space.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, good to confirm, sorry.
So any time, so you can't stay there for 2 consecutive days.
Right.
You have to leave the space and then you can return for another night.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, I guess the L&B car park, what is the leaving space? Is it 8 AM or 7? Time 8 AM. There'd be plenty of people wanting to use that space before 8 AM to get up Mount Iron. Is sort of my point. So I wouldn't say that's like, oh yeah, I hear your point completely. But I can foresee a conflict there in particular, given that, you know, the morning walk up the hill is a cultural ritual.
So it's within the panel's discretion to change the hours of arrival and departure or the number of car parks.
I see somewhere there was a proposal to change it from, instead of being 6 to 8, 6 PM to 8 AM, to being from 8
Yeah.
P7A.
So there's a paragraph in, that I just picked up this morning actually, in the earlier version, so paragraph, is it 47 F talks about the change in the hours, but that's incorrect. We should defer to the table 4 and not paragraph 47F. So apologies for that.
Just seeing the table, because I've written it down for both, I've seen the table first and then seen.
I'm reluctant to change the hours because I know that that's applied for consistency. More so that
They're not consistent, aren't they?
I know there are some of them that are slightly earlier and some slightly later because they're further away, but I think in this case, it might just be worth going to 3 parks rather than 5, or that kind of thing. Just because I feel like it's very untested waters and super delicate given the newness and in general, I just find it very problematic. But
I'm with Cody. I sort of feel like what if we were a little conservative to start with some of our numbers and tested some of these areas and even some of the areas we're a little bit worried about, really define some clear test sites and test it out for a year, see how it goes, come back. And if we haven't got these issues and we've bought some more social license with the community, then we can up them a couple of spaces. But I just feel like we're coming in trying to do this handshake with the community that we did around some of our RMP planning of going, well, what's the gradient that we could step towards without coming in and potentially chucking a hand grenade in the middle of some of these things. Whereas if we take a gradient approach, come in smaller, test it out enough to ensure we're not opening ourselves to legal risk, not providing enough. And then we see these areas that are working, we could expand on them or add more to them. Just a little bit concerned that we're, where we've got ability to respond to some clear submissions around saying, well, some of these 5s, can we start with 3? Can we keep the cooking inside the vans? Can we do these little adjustments? And if we don't have any problems, then we can be a little more flexible moving forward.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's certainly something. Did you, Chair, want to work through each of these in turn to make a recommendation on each of these?
Yeah, okay. Let's do that. We can hopefully put this one to bed, go back to the rural roads.
Look at Boundary Street, here's the larger vehicle.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, good point, Mary Meg, sorry, that, yeah, Boundary Street car park, the 15 that have been identified, actually,
Already camper car parks.
well, yeah, even though they haven't been specifically identified in the bylaw, because it's the purpose of the bylaw is to identify the car parks that are subject to the bylaw.
Yeah.
And then through the implementation of it, appropriate car parks will be identified. But in the case of Boundary Street, it's pretty obvious the ones that are the most appropriate, which are those 15 along the back.
Just through you, Chair, just want to check if there's any others from that list of Blue Core team that you might just want to highlight as you've done for Boundary Road before we take a pragmatic approach through each one. Are there any other comments you'd make about some of that background, like we've just done with Boundary?
Well, I would add, that's a good point, Ken. I think we've heard a bit from people about Camp Hill, in terms of the proximity to the access, I think it is, to the river.
recreation access, yeah.
So we could look at, being accommodating for that message, but that would be something that would be done through the next steps of the bylaw. I think for the Wanaka Recreation Centre, potentially thinking ones that are further away from the access to the
that corner.
Yeah, something like that.
Hill Road was there, freedom camping there over this last summer, I take it.
No,
people would stay there.
well, yeah.
Well, it would have been permitted for camping, but we didn't know anything.
Right.
We didn't know any issues during the day. I don't believe there was any RFSs come through either.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you check the space over that time or was it not on the radar?
Any ambassador visits there or?
Yeah, they would have passed by there.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it wasn't flagged the way we saw, I suppose, some inappropriate daytime use of other reserves.
Right, yeah. No, I guess, yeah, I mean, I'm sure when you put it on a map and say, hey, you're welcome to, then everybody will come along, but,
Again, a reminder that we will be marking the car parks. area
Yes.
that they,
Yeah.
that, you know,
Thank you, Mary. I was going to comment that you mentioned about what this could look like.
Yeah.
Picking up on a number of the points about how we actually need to activate these spaces. You know, through your chair coatings touched on, you know, one site in particular, and you know, we don't want to still the coin phrase of a handshake with the community, but a number of these sites will be tested in terms of being formalised. And there's going to be a significant amount of responsibility that this team takes very seriously about how we actually take this forward, report, track, and actually demonstrate how this is actually, you know, whatever this now looks like going forward, but how it's actually managed to land.
What would need to happen to our funding and financing policy to enable us to fund some of the education piece out of the enforcement revenue?
For you, Chair, we go away and get some advice about that. I mean, clearly the policy is set out, and as Kerry's touched on about what baskets currently are funded and how they're funded. The enforcement marshals are the same face, but when it comes to this element through the actual operation, it's a different setup, particularly with the government scoring the funding. And you know, complete transparency, as you all know, this summer is the last of some of that funding through you know the current annual or long-term plan. So there's further work to be done in that space. I can't answer it now, but we would take a note, go away and talk to the CFO and come back and talk to you about that.
Because I think 2 levels of service around facility servicing. Yeah, you know, we're going to see increases of rubbish, we're going to need more toilet servicing, and the burden of cost is falling on our ratepayers when it is purely visitor driven. So I just think we're hamstrung at the moment of looking at other ways to fund this other than rates. So. And so I had one other question, I'll just get it out of the way, but yeah, the broader input, but too, like what are we as a council able to do back to Wellington as far as just sending a signal to say, how do we hold rental companies accountable, ban the perverse incentives around returning bonds for clean toilets, for example. You know, it's just like, are there ways that we can put pressure back on at a national level, even if it's just a letter from committee or a letter from council to go, we need some national support around some of the things that are impacting through there just not being any control around environmental impacts, particularly on human waste. Because that's all through the country, right? It's not just our issue. If you're incentivizing people to turn back up with a clean toilet, it just shouldn't be.
I think so firstly that we do take opportunities to advocate to Wellington when we can, when the transition was extended and when they changed the legislation. Initially the green warrants, you had to have a toilet that was it needed to be ventilated to the exterior of the vehicle, which would have ruled out a lot of camper vans. So they amended it so that campers could use this cassette style toilet. With rental companies, through the survey work that the ambassadors conducted this year, we found out that more people who hire a camper van are more likely to stay in a campsite than those people who are in a privately owned vehicle. I spoke to the manager at THL on this place, and she said from her experience, people definitely do use the toilet. It's not a refund on your bond, but if you return the vehicle with a dirty toilet, you get charged a cleaning fee. So if you return it clean, you get no cleaning fee, I suppose, and part of that might not be using it. But a lot of campers did indicate that it wasn't their preference to use the toilet on board their vehicle, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're all in the bushes. They could provide for, you know, toilet cleans and things like that, which we would hope would be managed outside of the existing parks contract budgets. We liaise with them to talk about where hotspots might be. for more toilet cleans and, you know, and for rubbish disposal, campers are meant to take their rubbish to the refuse centre and the recycling centre because it's considered household waste. So if they were to put it in a public litter bin, that would be dumping.
And the same for more dump stations and things like that. Can we fine for dumping into a toilet at a rest stop or anything?
Yeah, if we can catch them in the act, there is a fine under the Freedom Camping Act for, I think it's depositing waste in a receptacle that's not a waste receptacle or something to that effect, which I think would cover you know, wastewater dumping, but it's difficult to catch people in the act of that basically, unfortunately. And then I think the only other thing to sort of note is the responsible camping strategy does call for user paced facilities for campers and exploring that. But yeah, it's a bit of work that's still to be done. Yeah.
And I've seen great posters in India where you've got these lines of, you know, washing in a river, 1,000 rupees, and starting a fire in the street, 2,000 rupees, you know, it's literally a little list of the fines you can get if you do the behaviours that we're talking about here. And, you know,
Venice as well, yeah.
Yeah.
I
I don't know that we're clear enough around some disincentives around the behaviours that we don't want. Like if we just had a little checklist that said, if we see you washing your dishes in the river, it's a $300 fine, you know, it's just, I don't think, are we able to apply a disincentive like that?
Well, I'm just clarifying what some of those fines are, but I think we've been challenged because unless we're not catching people in the act, I don't think we've put anything like that on signage before regarding the actual fine.
You right? Can, we've done it before,
Yeah,
Queenstown Hill, there's a bylaw, under the Dog Control Act, where we have a sign there saying what their fine will be if you take your dog up Queenstown Hill, so there is the ability to put.
So we can definitely add
We
that
could
in.
technically come up with a fine that says, if we see you with dishwashing liquid or detergents in any of our.
We can't come up.
You,
We could impose a fine for something like that.
you would have to stick to the wording in the act and the bylaw.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that is illegal just to wash your body and your dishes and all like that.
I think it would be for ORC to enforce.
It's a grey area, it's not for us.
So as far as the freedom camping goes, there's a fine in there, which is $400 or something for freedom camping outside the bylaw, isn't it? Is that right? And then there's another one for reserves, camping in a reserve is $800 or something. That's pretty limited what fines are applicable.
It's
just making them up
not
for
for washing and the pooping.
Well, there's probably no fine in place.
Well, there's human defecation, which is a broad overall one. That is, yeah, it's just catching people in it.
But would you get fined if you were caught doing that, or would you just be told off?
No, I'm sure most people would do the citizens telling off, but if someone caught you legally, yeah, you'd be public defecation and that would be.
You'd have to be caught by a warranted officer.
Yeah, that's the problem.
If you look to our education or our enforcement strategy, is education through to enforcement. So as we would across any of our enforcement streams, if we are there and we're able to educate somebody, we will start with that educational piece. It'll be an educational first approach. Have that conversation. If that person was then to be caught doing that a second time, that's when we'd look to be doing an enforcement and step up that enforcement level. No different than what we would do with any other enforcement stream, parking, animal control, all those things. I did just want to circle back a little bit to the revenue stream. I just wanted to clarify one point is that enforcement actually don't aim to make money and or bring in revenue from any of our enforcement. Our aim is actually to not be issuing any infringements at all, and that people are complying with the Act. So our goal is to issue as little infringements as possible. And if that theory comes about, you then wouldn't have money or leftover money to be able to put that elsewhere. The other thing I think just is important to point out is whilst we could go to the CFO and have a look to change the way the money is proportioned out, I think it's really important to note that the money that is excess and going back to the pot is already going towards a reduction in rates in other areas. So if you move that money from one area to this area, you're still going to be short elsewhere for rates.
Robbing Peter to pay.
That's right. So yeah.
And it's a good point, so I'll just seek clarity around what that process is. But as Kerry's pointed out, there's
And I'm sure that's me.
Right, so in terms of these numbers of spaces though, are we going to adjust the, sort of like the idea of maybe starting off low and seeing how it goes and increasing if we need to at the next bylaw review or something, but
Sorry, just in terms of adjusting them, just so the panel knows, you know, it's a. It would be a full SCP process. It wouldn't be a matter of simply increase, like, we can't have a bylaw approved by full council on 9th of October and then decide all of a sudden that this is going okay and we want to increase it. We would have to.
well, that's why.
Can you not make amendments?
That's why
post
we have the
hearing
next
based on
bylaw review
feedback?
maybe.
Yeah, but that would be 5 years away.
Well, the council is open to review a bylaw at any time it chooses. We're just trying to be really clear with you that
Right.
we can't just amend it by resolution or what have you, like the traffic and parking bylaw enables us to do. It would be a full review, is what we're saying.
So,
So just for the purposes of clarity, Kerry and Lou, if the hearing panel wanted to amend what's in front of them now, you're saying that would still be a part of the SCP process, or that's within the remit right now?
So if the hearing panel would like to recommend to council that it change those numbers.
Yeah.
Now is the opportunity to do that, and that would get put to council to decide whether or not to adopt that recommendation.
which is what we suggest, but so it's not another SCP.
No, sorry, but I was more talking to the point, I think, that you're making, council, about let's do its gradual approach.
If we did like 3 and tried to come back in a year, we'd come back in 5 years.
Well, no, you could come back in a year if council determined that it was very committed to doing that, but we would, what I'm trying to make clear is that we would have to do another consultation process to then increase the number of car parks.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
yes,
okay, that makes more sense.
so you can do it now, but
Yeah.
this gradual process. would need-
Yeah, wow.
When equally, if we wanted to leave them as they have, and then in the years time we wanted to reduce them, that would.
We have to do another SCP.
Same deal.
Yeah,
applies.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it sort of makes more sense to get a more appropriate number now. I mean, started off that, bottom up, Camp Hill, go for 10 rather than 15.
So did you ask the question about, so there are 150 car parking spaces
No,
158 total, isn't it?
at Camp Hill?
at Camp Hill, I doubt that
Oh.
there is.
Oh, sorry, you're saying.
And I think the other nuance to that as well is that a lot of people who are there are parking with trailers. Because they've often got boats on the back and they're in like large vans and other sorts of shuttles that need lots of space to get in and
I
around.
think that comment implies that camping is at night, kayaking is during the day,
Yeah, true, that's true.
providing they're not still there when the kayaks turn up.
Yeah, that's true. But I still think with a slow roll, it's a better approach, but, I mean, Allenby plays car back then, I was more inclined to go to 3 rather than 5. It seems weak, I know. I'm really trying.
Could we go top down?
Yeah.
So right, Amy's gonna report any changes in the list here.
I'm not comfortable with it. No one is, it's fine.
So the 15 for Boundary Street, those are existing 15 camping car parks.
Yep.
I still have my own personal issue of it being just over the road, over the creek from the camping ground, but
Are they kind of doing that now? We're getting freedom camping in there now, right? In Boundary Street.
There's been an odd bit, there was an odd bit over the summer and there was some like morning picnicking pictures I saw, yeah. So there was an odd bit, but not nearly what there was in Park Street or Friar Street, yeah.
Pool trays only 2 anyway, so you can't really reduce it. Industrial place, is that at the end of industrial place in the little turning area?
It's.
There's a car park.
No, it's
It's not
not.
the right.
So car park near where the jump
Oh, on George, on.
On
George
Road Road, yeah.
That's right, so that one's on, they're both on George Road, the other one's down by the wetlands more, isn't it?
Yes,
George Road.
yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, there's not too much drama with that. Lakeview next to the campground,
Just with,
just saying.
sorry, just a note in Lakeview as well, what I've remembered, it's the opposite to Boundary Street, there's actually a height restriction on Lakeview, so it would stop large camper vans from using that space.
Whereas those ones out here are for large camp,
Yes.
although they're not.
There was
There is
a
a
height
large
restriction up
camp.
there.
Yeah, oversized.
Area.
Yeah.
But other camper vans can
Yeah,
park in them as
others.
well, they're small ones.
I think they're encouraged to use the other smaller, normal size vehicles are encouraged to use the normal size spaces. But for freedom camping, it would be open for everybody, but camperlands of varying sizes.
So with construction destined to start up there, would that, if that looked to be a health and safety conflict or something around that over summer, would that just end up being an application for a temporary ban while construction took place?
The car park's going to remain during construction of the Lakeview.
We haven't been advised otherwise.
No. So we're gonna leave that one at 10. are we?
As we get some use out of that
Not many people are parking in it anyway.
I was gonna say, might be a
road to the new freedom camping
Yeah.
car park instead of road to nowhere.
See that grey stream, and I thought that 10 seemed like quite a small car park.
So it's essentially one side of the car park. If you can visualize it.
Yep. So sort of back against that fence kind of thing, yeah. And yeah, so that was limited to 7 o'clock in the morning.
You got the attachment D or table 4.
Not what I've written down out of it.
Excuse me. So
It's from 6 p.m.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, 8 a.m.
Yeah. six to 8.
So it's going to be attachment D table.
on page 91 of
Attachment D or table 4. Either one of those. Okay, you've got handy.
So is that, so that's the car park on the corner of Grey and McBride, isn't it?
That's right.
I got that right.
That's correct. So,
Okay.
there's maps in the Bible, by the way, that show each of these car parks as well.
What was the reason for changing it to 18? There is, I think, in the report, it does mention the reason, but I can't remember what it was.
It was to achieve consistency
Right.
with others.
like Eric's.
Which one? Sorry?
Grey Street.
Yeah, it's 10, is it?
10 currently in the draft bylaw.
And you're looking, what did you say there, 18?
I was talking about the time, so it was,
Oh,
it was
sorry.
7 a.m. and now it's 8 a.m. the kick out time. It's 10 spaces currently. Okay.
So it's identified as a commuter car park as well, obviously for its proximity to the bus
Yeah,
hub.
Yeah.
I feel like 10's too many in there with it, but I don't know.
I think it gets, we're probably echoing a desire to have a conservative amount versus, and so like if we're consistent across, like you were saying before about sticking with 10, and then maybe some of the other ones where they are high, bringing them back down so that they are gentle and that there is still making sure that we make space as a theme,
Yeah,
Because 10 is pretty much half that car park, isn't it?
and
not
it's,
10%.
and to me, it is a park and ride as well, right? It's a commuter space, we're trying to get
You know, you've
people on
got,
those buses, it's gonna be a huge bus hub and we're kind of handing it over.
8
Yeah,
o'clock
there's a
in the morning
campground.
potentially means 8:30, 9, so by the time they've got out of bed and shifted themselves, it's
But even
It's
today,
starting to
it's still
encroach.
problematic from like commuter route.
starting to cause an issue with the bus hub right next to it.
Yeah, so you could look to reduce that if you felt wanted to.
Yeah, I feel like an earlier departure and a slight reduction in numbers, just. It is a hub, right? It's our hub, it's our PT hub, and we're handing it over to more than half of it to,
So can we reduce it to 6? Is that feasible? Just for that access, that reason of access for people using the bus. Hub.
If you're
yeah,
if you're minded to, that's entirely within your discretion.
I think
Any
reducing the
warning
number
against that?
is more effective than reducing the
I
time.
think the thing that we would, I suppose, advise is that, you look at them consistently and we treat them, at least car parks that are of similar nature.
Yeah.
We've identified some as commuter and some as not commuter, and a couple of others is sort of like a little bit different. So I think,
is that, sorry, is that not a time restricted car park during the day? Like it's not 2 hours or 4 hours, you could park there for your whole 8 hour workshop.
I think it said 10 hours maximum
So,
stay.
maximum.
Yeah,
But you could potentially have a worker in there for 8 hours using a parking ride situation.
yeah, and it's not unpaid as well. With the 6 PM to 8 AM times, we thought it also aligned with the sort of pay and display hours that you find in the urban car parks. So if you parked in Boundary Street after 6 PM, it would be free until 8 AM again the next day.
Yeah, I guess the difference for me is that this one's such a small car park.
Mm.
I'd definitely be keen to suggest fewer spaces. Sure. I guess, you know, we can leave it open to 8 o'clock and see how it goes. And it's quite close to town, so it's easy to enforce.
Sure. So sorry, did you want to change the hours and the number of car parks or just the?
So should we just leave the hours?
I think leave the
Yeah,
hours,
go
I
for
think there were people saying that hours need to be practical enough that people will abide by them
And consistent.
and consistent, so I think, yeah, we're better to reduce numbers rather than.
We're going to change it to 6 or 4.
Go 5 and 20.
I mean,
It's a quarter of the car park.
I was gonna say 5's consistent with others, but then if we drop the
If we
5s
drop
to
the
3,
five,
it's not, so let's stick with. Yeah,
I think, yeah,
I feel like 6, but
we
I
can look
don't
at each
know.
on a case by case basis, but we also, I suppose, want to make sure that we're being consistent in terms of the way that we're treating different types, similar types of car park.
Yeah,
That Grey
There's also
Street,
that 10%, figure that we've had in mind, which would only make it 2.
Yes, and TNT have been clear that that is open to.
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah,
Well,
as a starting point.
We put the 10% rather than looking at sort of work. I mean, I agree that just consistency is the aspect, because it's like, well, even at the messaging, it's like, what car parks are we dedicating for? And what approach are we taking strategically, not just sitting here and trying to figure out a number that someone vibes with.
and they will be designated and they will be marked, right? That building at Grey Street next to it, that's family counselling services, am I right with that?
Yeah,
Am I right?
centralised family services
Yeah.
in,
So we have a lot of vulnerable children coming in and out of here during daytimes, but I'm presuming it's not going to be impacted by the hours of campers and things there, but just.
I doubt it, it runs as a 9 to 5 service, so.
Can we just make it 4?
Okay, go for it.
4 spaces.
Could I suggest, Chair, that we work through as a first run
Yeah.
and look at it, and the point that's well made about the strategic intent.
Mhm.
Given there's over 2,000 pages of well thought out submissions amongst us.
Yeah.
I think it's, clearly some themes that have come through that. And then as you've experienced with the team, get the conclusion of your first draft run. If there's any points that we think you need to be well informed about around that particular use of that site, we can also make sure operationally that what we know, you're informed. Yeah. Comfortable with that?
Sounds good. So the event centre, obviously, we prohibited camping there recently, changed the parking rules, but we're happy with 9 in that car park. Are you happy as the man who controls the event centre?
Well, I need to treat very carefully, but for a range of reasons, and clearly it's an operational site, and for the transparent context too, it's a well-used area, and as we experienced this year, Marie and Amy and the team led that around when it got to 92, 97 campers in that site, and we had primary school championships kicking off. So I think Luke's articulated clearly that there may be occasions where that car park is actually going to be part of a wider program. We've got global rugby games coming up, for example. We'll see many thousands of participants, including parents. Every inch of tarmac across that wider Frankton area will be well sought for.
So we can use that temporary restriction.
And then the other element within that, of course, and I was going to comment at the end, a number of what we're seeing across growth, not just on this list, but there's program changes coming at us. The site, particularly if we progress the indoor community sports centre and any other upgrades associated with that 14.2 hectares. So what's set out there, it's part of that program, and I noted actually the EV point that Kerry touched on. We just need to again correlate, but what's stated is what we put forward.
So I'll give you 9 is basically one of the sites
It's a part of it.
of the top car park, the northern car park.
The very first one you drive past, yeah, right, yep. Okay, we'll leave that as that then. Okay.
And it comes with restrictions, you know, you see it, that we go by.
Howard's Drive 3. Okay, isn't it?
I think the pushback on that one is the thinking of how quickly does that become an urban area? Yeah, like at the moment, it feels a little.
Within about 5 years, when it's time to review the bylaw.
By the time we come back to it, but yeah, I definitely wouldn't encourage any more than 3. And that, I think, is what we're hearing concern around the community there, is that it actually does feel either more urban or more rural, because it's not like we're putting it into an area where there's things to go to, like restaurants and bars and services that we're justifying some of the other car parks with. It's literally just parked up opposite our retirement village and at the top of our Lake Hayes community.
There's only 3, so I mean,
3.
the others are less than 5 as well, though, like we can't
Yeah.
really adjust them too much. The 50 in Kingston, that's fine, 'cause it's already established as that use. The 5 at Flint Street, it's 5 too many for that, that's a very small car park.
I'm keen to respond to the Village Association's submission around 3 on that, because I know they've got a lot of engagement with their wider community there as well. And I also acknowledge that the APPA are in support of the car parks in Flint Street, some of them being used as freedom camping, because Arrowtown is short on accommodation and they want to provide some opportunity of clientele for food and beverage and retail, so. But I do think, I know we're saying that EVs aren't confirmed there yet, but there's just so many bits in play. And if we're not going to come back to this for a few years, we could end up tying ourselves into a challenging position with 5. I'd support 3.
Through the chair, I just want to comment on that, though. There are a whole wide range of projects going on in some of these areas too, which don't have an outcome yet. So that isn't something that we can take too much into account,
That's right.
which is the challenge.
So we'll go for 3 on that one then.
Which one?
Flint Street. Then up with Monica Rick, seem to you happy with 18?
18 is just the block on the back corner, I imagine, so yeah, I feel like that's reasonable.
I mean, I am concerned that we have so many submissions against opposing them, but the reasons for opposing them don't really fall under the grounds of the Act.
Yeah, I mean, a number, from what I recall, a number were concerned around, you know, equal access to the event centre and facilities, but I suppose what we've tried to do is, once again, with the hours of arrival and departure and now before closing and opening, should try and mitigate that access to the recreation facilities issue. Yeah, but obviously that they did receive, all the Wanaka ones receive a larger number of opposition.
I think the Wanaka Rec Centre was less opposition towards
Paying on the old chat ones.
No, Beacon Point Road and Allenby Place.
I'm definitely keen to go 3 with Allenby Place, given that we've applied that to Howard's Drive and Glenelg Main and with others. And I think it's even a smaller car park than what Howard's Drive is from a space wise. And I do think there'll be potential recreational access. So anyway, there's like, for me, I feel like there's safe justification for being conservative around the numbers there.
Yeah. And the Beacon Point Road, that's not a very big car park either, is it?
Not as familiar with it.
Sort of informal
Yeah.
parking area, yeah, alongside the road.
It'd be harder to,
I mean, it's a specific submission about that, but again, it's more amenity.
it's more, or not. I mean, that is right on the water's edge, and I know the 10 metre setback has a bit of, yeah, like, there's no, obviously you've done the assessment, there's no health and safety or access problems with that site that could justify it.
What about the submission we had saying that some of our legal campgrounds are within 10 metres, like Glendale and things like that, and that 10 metres was too,
It's different, doesn't matter.
doesn't matter?
Doesn't fall under the scope of this bylaw.
Well,
Here,
in addition, I think you could say that they are formally,
yeah,
you know, they have wastewater.
Yeah.
Management.
Dump, waste dump stations and
Even
things like that,
facilities, yeah.
better facilities.
Yep.
Yep, okay, thank you.
so do we want to leave Beacon Point at 5 or reduce it as well?
I honestly don't have strong views on it, at this stage, because I'm just not as well canvassed. I mean, if we're implying consistency.
I don't know, for me, those two were more about not so many, how many end up there, but how many try and go there. And it was more about, is it signage or education? Like, if you've got 3 or 5 at the end of the road, you're gonna be better with 5 because you need 2 not go there.
And we know legally and litigiously, like, you know, it's different to practically, which is, I guess, what we're trying to find a balance of in terms of. We
Yeah,
know
I'm
the
just
bylaw-
reiterating that the travel up and down that road to or from
Yeah.
that site is not a consideration of.
Yes, and then we understand that completely. I think we're just trying to speak to the practicalities around how it's applied.
Has there been a freedom camping issue there over the last summer, do we know?
Yeah, it just puts it on the map. Which is part of the problem, because as soon as it's there, then everyone will be seeking it out. I feel LMB 3, Camp Hill 10, Wanaka Rec Centre 18, I'm happy with. And I just don't know how I feel at this point. That's all I can muster.
Can we just make it 3?
3 Beacon Point.
Yeah, so we've provided some, we've acknowledged that, you know, for some people it's an issue. Because I think, you know, other access was raised for that one too, with the cycle trail nearby and going through the area. You know, we're only recommending this for our fellow.
How many are we, how many are we
Yeah.
shaving off our overall total?
I think it's reduced by 23 at this stage, so 158 minus 23.
So 130-ish.
Is like a red red sheet considered in the assessments of provisions for freedom camping?
Sorry.
Not as part of the bylaw, but it is obviously what we're looking at is to align it with the bylaw
And
and the numbers, for example, at Kingston, like at the moment it's oversubscribed in summer, so we're really looking to make
Yeah.
sure it's better managed, but
yes.
yeah, we're not counting it here. No.
And is there a direction in the Act that tells us we're a certain proportion or baseline limitation outside of just providing for a number of spaces that are compliant?
No.
There isn't, if the panel thought that they wanted to increase it elsewhere in order to, you know, I'm not suggesting that's necessary, it's just an option for you to, if you thought there were other locations that might have been better suited, you could accommodate more, then you could look to do that.
They probably said with me back to the rural road that if we go in, we actually just better to specify some specific sites that we think could work in the rural environment
I think
and test them.
everybody's uncomfortable with this in probably a balanced way. That I don't think we want to be, we're not really coming at this from a strategic point of view. I think we're coming at it from trying to be pragmatic and fair. And because these are new sites, I think we want to be conservative. That's sort of the approach we want to take. And I think there will be more options to discuss further, a better way to manage this as we talk about, you know, systems, registrations, booking systems that I feel like will be more comfortable to discuss that works for more people. So I think that's sort of the approach that I'm taking on this, at least, is to
Conservative.
be as gentle as we can,
sites.
acknowledging the discomfort this will cause doing anything, but I feel like we're pretty open-minded.
So can we just go over again the numbers you've got for these ones, so we've reduced them to?
Boundary Street 15.
Yeah.
Gorge Road 2.
Yeah.
Industrial Place 6. Lakeview 10. Grey Street reduced to 4 parks. QEC 9. Howard's Drive 3. Glenorchy 3. Gibbston
2.
2. Yeah, sorry, I wrote it 3, it's an autopilot, Kingston Road 50, Hanson, the Flint Street changed to 3, WRC 18, Allenby Place 3, Beacon Point 3, Campbell 10.
So my math was poor then.
Yeah,
I think
I
it's
guess
141.
17 reductions I got.
Yeah, sorry.
It's been a few days, I think that. So we're happy with that then.
Yep.
So we've got 15, now we've got less than an hour, 12 minutes.
Great, so
So that was right. So, I mean, the further amendments that may address some submitters, there wasn't then really anything further than what we've already got in there now, is there?
nothing, I mean, there's no obvious solutions. I mean, to me,
So we're not going to prohibit, we're not going to go option E, we're not going to go D, we're not going to go A. Could do, but we're still with B is the recommended option.
I think a lot of the, I keep repeating the same points. For me, I came in here being like, you know, I really don't think this works, but what I've understood is that this is just marking all the rural roads. And our strategy is that for all rural roads, we're applying the same restrictions, which is if you're 5 meters out and have a, you know, hard stand, then that feels like people can be less confused. A lot of the submissions are saying, please don't identify my road as a place to go freedom camping. It's like, we've identified every road, but it doesn't look like that.
So I think
Which is a big thing of like tone and messaging and communication and all of that stuff.
So I think
It's
we're happy
so
with,
critical.
we're happy with the restrictions and the restrictions that are applied.
Yeah,
And it really just comes down to a matter of how that's communicated
yeah,
through the bylaw and so that people understand it.
yeah.
Because the alternative of not having all these roads identified is that it goes to option A, which is just freedom camping anywhere that people can choose.
Because if we went to A, it wouldn't have the 5 metre off the road or the hard stand, right? It'd just be pull up wherever you like.
It wouldn't have a number of nights, it wouldn't have.
It wouldn't have any
surface,
restriction
yeah.
at all. So, yeah, I agree with the other panel members that it's the impression
It's the
that we've
interpretation.
opened up all of this opportunity where actually the restrictions mean we haven't, but we're giving the impression to our local community that it's a free for all. We're giving the impression to our local community that we're kind of going with that.
So I don't know whether it's a, you know, a way of showing it differently that people can understand that, or whether it's just a matter of trying to communicate it with them, but it's difficult.
I think the points you both raised are acknowledged that through the consultation materials, we were marking roads and we weren't focusing on the implementation end, it was a consultation.
Yeah.
And so I see that there is a lot of room there in how that is communicated to you, like Councillor Guy around. This is actually providing conditions that wouldn't otherwise be in place. That's not a point we were emphasizing in the consultation because that's not what we were consulting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like with anything.
And then it's that signage and that education piece, is it this is where it's allowed or this is where it isn't allowed? Is it on every, as you enter the road, there is a sign that says.
So, yeah, we will do as much as we can between now and the meeting on the 9th of October to provide some suggestions around how we will be approaching that. We're working on those at the moment, but we may not have it all complete, but we can definitely provide some examples of how we plan to sign and communicate. We already have a good communication campaign at the moment. We would be building on what we've already done in the past.
Yeah, I think that sort of interactive map aspect, because I mean, I doubt any traveller is going to come here and read all the bylaws around how they're going to do it. And yeah, I think there's plenty of existing examples that show more intuitively somebody who's trying to comply the zoning type of approach. So yeah, I honestly think there's a fair and fine way forward through this, and it doesn't require much. I mean,
You know, I think
Most people want to do the right thing, right? There's nothing scarier than being woken up in the middle of the night by someone banging on your camper van window to tell you you're not in the right place.
yeah,
Most people
Well,
want
I
to be.
was just going to say to you, I mean, clearly there's been a lot of community voice and other organisations that have come back on this particular piece of the topic. And we've obviously heard from the sector, as you pointed out, Councillor Guy. And even yesterday, I think one of the submitters talked about even the ease of just having a rubbish truck at the turnaround area and the risk of those sort of sites, you know, that currently are just part of the operation of living in these rural settings.
Yeah.
Access to the gates for the larger tractor and all the rest of it. So there's certainly a strong sense of, you know, and amongst everything, the teams having worked through with a piece of legislation, we get those settings is a big dose of just what a reality looks like in the day-to-day of operating in those, living in those spaces. So
In terms
Yeah,
of
we're
the
really
day-to-day
cognizant.
operation then of with the, when a bylaw is in action in place, if there are spots where people, you know, are misinterpreting the restrictions and camping there that don't apply, do we have the ability to just put up a sign saying, you know, no camping? We're not prohibiting camping under the bylaw, but we're saying that you can't camp here because it doesn't meet the restrictions. Is there any ability to do that?
Well, I mean, we probably need to get a little bit more guidance on it, I think, from legal, but
Doesn't have to be sorted out today. But it's just-
yeah, I mean, what we've had in the past when we've had clear areas where no camping was allowed, you would have probably remember the green and red no camping signs that were across most of the rural roads.
Yeah.
So we've got those to reuse where appropriate. So again, we're trying to recycle where possible. So look, we'd have to seek some advice on that. But yes, if there was a lot of camping occurring in an unsafe area, which is, you know, the advice, that's why we've got the conditions for the rural roads, then I would think we could have some sort of messaging there.
I think, you know, we can certainly check, but Marie's right. I mean, and kind of the key principles that we've been working through with the assessment across the entire document is around that safety element. So if you've got a, you know, significant agricultural vehicle that's going to be accessing a key part of that, you know, and there's a requirement to have a lay-by or a distance that's going to have a safe operating procedure, I would think that we need to just check what that looks like.
Okay.
Because as you covered off, we've heard a lot from some of the sectors in this space.
Yeah, we had a lot of submissions from big stations around the whole district.
Really activated.
Yeah.
And looking at some of those other areas in their maps, there was really clear hatching on the rural maps, particularly around turning circles and access ways where they've just dropped hatches of do not here, not here.
And people spoke quite clearly about what they're experiencing today. And you know, the education piece and all the rest of it will continue down that path. But and you know, the team through Amy, actually, we have a lot of good relationships with some of the roading farm stations. You know, we do see some of what we're experiencing. But
and some of the feedback we got that the work was too big for us to undertake. We've been well served by our submitters, giving us really, you know, the Gibston group have been out with their tape measure and checked every rural road. So they're doing the work for us. And if we could identify through that which places they identify, I think Gibston came up with a possibility of somewhere that might have some capacity for a couple of spaces. And we can work with our community groups around. So thank you for getting out there with your tape measure. We're going to listen to you. There's nowhere on that road that works. But
Well, for example, through the chair, they did talk about the school bus coming into the area. So again, we would look at where those car parks are marked, so it doesn't interfere with that school bus route.
we can capture that granular detail that came back through those really good detailed submissions around where we might put the specific spaces.
But we have to be realistic too about how many signs we can install over any given period. So we will have to do this likely in a responsive way to issues. You know, we can definitely take on board some of the health and safety concerns raised by some of those areas, but doing a massive signage overhaul will take a bit of time. And we need to understand, you know, benefits of doing that.
And if we
in some
cite
areas.
specific, we'll be more accurate. If we just do a blanket re-signage, we might apply too broad a brush.
And we have to be careful with that, because if we've had signs in the wrong places in the past, that creates confusion and issues as well. So, and, you know, if we've said it's a permitted or restricted freedom camping area with conditions, we have to be really careful that we're not putting a sign up where actually it is appropriate, things like that as well.
I think that clarity of signage, but and there was another submitter, sorry, that made a comment about QR codes for different languages as well, and I thought that was a longer term valuable piece of consideration to go through.
Yeah,
It's a bigger IT piece that has.
well, again, through the
Sometimes
chair, I
we-
would say there's a lot of tech coming through now where there are translatable materials on Python's websites. So it's quite expensive to get materials translated. So again, the technology may catch up and not require us to specifically translate.
To do it.
So the general outcome of all of that is that we're really happy with the restrictions, and it's just the communication of it and to make it easy for people to understand and not frighten them. This is the tricky part.
And that would also, I also feel like there's a piece to indicate that we're wanting to look into the registration booking system or some, and I know it's not part of this process, but we want to sort of be proactive around doing that work so that we can mitigate all the unnecessary travel that could happen and noise as a consequence of opening and enabling these spaces. So I do think it's a big part of it.
So then go back to your question about the amendments, attachment G. I mean, I'm happy with the proposed. I don't know whether you guys have got any comments, any further comments on it.
Yeah.
Was that all the content of attachment D?
Yeah, all the amendments that have come in since well, that's as part of the consultation process, isn't it?
That's
Yeah.
right.
Um,
So, some of the more material ones are the introduction of, the ability for any person to request, to temporary prohibit, restrict or change conditions in any restricted freedom camping area. So that, is partially in response to some of those concerns around the recreational use of the likes of Camp Hill or at QEC or WRC. If there's an event, council can also do it in and of itself. So there's the council's pathway, it's chief executive, or there's any other person's pathway to do it.
Does that equally apply for people who want to, remove the restriction piece so that there's no camping allowed, as well as people who want to relax the restrictions so you can camp there? It goes both
Two
ways.
different pathways. Yep, so you can request to camp in a permanent area temporarily as well.
Yeah.
And I think that was the most material amendment. We introduced a setback for the water body, 10 metres in rural roads with a definition for water body, which is advised by Peter at TNT, in response to submissions. And some other minor amendments and some explanatory notes, which hopefully.
As a request to work with Lynn's more in the future as well. Is that something we can, we've got the delegations with Doc, is that a relationship we could look to explore with Lynn's?
Look, yes, we do. Through our Hearts team, we already have a relationship with Lynn's, and we would, Amy and I will be connecting with our parks officers who have that relationship to continue conversations with Lynn's. But as pointed out, that may not be something, this is a priority area necessarily for Lynn's. So we can have those conversations, but it may not. And what we've done this summer, what Amy's done with Lynn's in the Hawea foreshore area, for example, which was raised, is work really closely with them on signage and ensuring that there's clear messaging around the.
I suppose my
camping on those
curiosity
areas.
is whether we could work with them to identify sites where it may be practical rather than the blanket prohibition, but is there opportunity? It was mentioned on some submissions around looking at different private sites or land sites or dog sites or reserve sites.
Number of submissions.
Yeah. I mean, we
And
can have those
that
conversations.
partnership piece that perhaps we haven't explored around what other opportunities could we find?
Just through you two, it's a good point, council. I mean, you just look at the numbers, right? We're already pre-COVID numbers and growing with sort of very pro-government about further tourism. So I think we're going to need to be open to those opportunities around those partnership private. I mean, we currently work alongside 3 key government agencies. Doc, you've touched on NZTAs in the document, and also Lynn's. So we need to continue to maintain and strengthen some of those relationships.
Yeah. And even perhaps some of our station owners and things where they may be willing to go, well, you get all my rural roads out of there, I'll give you a corner of my paddock.
Well, as you noted, in amongst the submissions, people had actually indicated some of that as well, that thinking. And it's not lost on us, that rural road segment, and some work obviously for us at how we tell that story based on what you've given us as feedback today. but you know, it's the sixth largest district in the country.
Yeah.
In terms of land holding, so, you know, it is a big part of, you know, there's an urban aspect, but we certainly know what those networks mean for a whole range of the way people live, work and play in those areas.
So I've only got one final question, really. It's really short. But is there anything that's come from the submissions we've heard over the last 2 days that gives us thought to prohibit any specific areas?
Do you mention Stanley Street and Charles Street? Was that the?
So one of the things that we, yes, which I have got in here,
So yes to the chair's question.
yes, so one of the,
Well, they're in here anyway.
Been a long couple of days, chair.
so what we've asked for is for the Stanley Street and Shoulder Street. That's the only area that comes to mind. So those are state highways, which we'd have to get NTT's approval for, which we're working on.
Right.
But in terms of, you know, many submitters have asked for roads to be prohibited on the basis that they're unsafe for travelling on.
Yeah.
And, you know, we've got a piece in the report which looks at that, and,
The restrictions cater for that really, don't they? But
well, the point, I guess, is that, the bylaw is in the business of trying to manage how people traverse roads and whether it's appropriate for them to traverse this road or that road. It's about managing freedom camping.
Yeah.
And the act of travelling to a freedom camping location is not, freedom camping.
yeah, I was more meaning whether there were anything that, and I can't think of too many off the top of my head now, but any specific areas that we might have thought, maybe that area needs to be highlighted and prohibited. One of them was Rutherford Road, which we've covered. You've said that. There's no action.
And Maystown came up as well.
Well, they sound out of it now anyway, because that's, you've
Oh, yeah,
explained that.
so that's in there as well,
Yeah.
recommend, I think that's largely about the ownership nature of the road rather than,
Yeah.
it's because it's not local authority land, effectively.
No, because it's always been thought that it was a public road administered by the council, but is it not?
Do you guys have?
No.
It isn't a public road, no, but so, for example, council working closely with the Wheel Drive group at the moment to manage access onto the road, but we do manage the heritage assets within Maystown as well.
I do know the answer to that, chair, because I've just worked through it and had all the community engagement. You might need a cup of coffee to respond, but I think you have pretty much how you've described it. And there's been that working group with the wider community about how they access and keep maintenance of it.
Yeah.
And they're looking at, you know, different incentives and investment models to make sure it's an upkeep, which community is right through the full drive.
The other ones of that nature that I jotted down, but again, they might already be covered by restrictions, like we had mentioned the car park at the end of the Moonlight track. But I would imagine that that's also covered by the restrictions. There's, if you follow the restrictions, there wouldn't be anywhere to actually camp there.
Interpretation,
Yeah, the other one was, well, the spring one was, you know, any roads that are going through some of these big stations, like, you know, the Mount Nicholas Road that was shown us yesterday, whether we could just say, no, that section of road is prohibited, but is it
which road, sorry?
through Mount Nicholas Station?
No.
That's the way.
It's covered by rural road, but because there's no fences, it's open to interpretation where the boundary is, whether you can pull off the road. You know, should an area like that just be a prohibited section?
I suppose, like, you know, what are we prohibiting it on the basis that people might go onto private land that's out of scope?
Yeah, that's right.
I think that would be risky.
Yeah, so if you apply the access to the area, health and safety to people visiting the area.
Well, yeah.
That doesn't, there's nothing really that falls within those criteria then.
It's not necessarily, it's not the act of freedom camping that is presenting the possible health and safety risk travelling on the road.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, it's a challenging one, yeah.
No. Nothing else along those lines that you want to say? Or any other questions? We're about to finish.
Yeah, no, I think it's been a process.
Yeah.
I think I'm pretty carrying.
Really? No.
Oh, no, not,
Here it is.
I know.
So do you want to do the resolution?
Yeah, that's what I've got here. So, any other comments? Or we good to go? Right, so the resolution then is that the hearing panel note the contents of this report, receives all submissions to the draft Freedom Camping Bylaw 2025, and here's the submitters who wish to be heard. We've already agreed to accept the submissions and recommend to council the final form of the draft Freedom Camping Bylaw to be adopted with changes as an outcome of the consultation process. I'll move that. Together. Any discussion on it? Right, all in favour?
Aye.
Aye. So, yeah, a little bit of work to do still before October.
Yeah.
Do you want to send a draft through at all, or will you just bring it to the meeting in October? And
It was a question I was going to ask the panel. We can do that after it's been written, noting that the turnaround time here is pretty tight.
Yeah.
So it would be more for a sense test to make sure we've accurately reflected the panel sentiments, noting that I understand governance would also attach the minutes from this session to
that meeting.
that meeting
Yeah.
item, if that's what the panel does.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. Well, I'll be keen just to see it.
Yeah.
Draft.
Yeah, I feel like we're gonna have to do a lot of talking to explain to people sort of how it all was reflected anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a certain amount of onus on how it comes out.
Right. Well, we'll end the meeting at
3:42.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's been a great week.
Thanks, councillors.